Okay, good afternoon. Our work session is called to order, and we are just about 15 minutes behind schedule, and quite a robust agenda for this afternoon. We will follow the agenda as printed and as posted. First item 3.01, is our educational planning recommendations review. About 9 or so months ago, in our planning and discussions as a governance team, in consideration of long-term planning and with the current challenges and opportunities that we observed as a governance team, we agreed that it would be in order and important for our planning to hire a group that would come in and do what has been called by several different names. Demographic study, it has been called educational planning study, which is the name I most prefer, because that's exactly what it is. It's an opportunity for us to look at the strategic plan, our vision, mission and vision for Norfolk Public Schools, and really take advantage of the great opportunities we have while overcoming the current challenges to becoming that proud cornerstone of a diverse community. And so we've been at this work now since August or September, I believe, and we're ready now for the final, or for the presentation of the findings and options and scenarios. Some of the considerations in engaging in this study were looking at our building capacity, consolidation or closure opportunities, socioeconomic diversity, opportunities for socioeconomic diversity in our schools, CTE high school, and rezoning options for the high schools in the city, opportunities for choice. We wanted to have community engagement in this process, and we certainly appreciate all of our stakeholders as well as those members of our steering committee that have worked diligently and demonstrated a great deal of commitment to this cause and to the improvement of Norfolk Public Schools. And today we will receive options and scenarios, and I think it's really important to note and to emphasize that that's exactly what we're receiving today. Some options and various scenarios as a part of the work of not only Tracy Richter, but as well the steering committee that has come together representing our community of stakeholders. And so I'm excited about what we've received, and I will say again, I'm excited about the opportunities that we have to really improve the work and the quality of education here in Norfolk. Having said that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent for his remarks, and then we will receive our report.
Okay. Thank you. Chairman Houston, members of the board, and guests, additional stakeholders. I'll echo what the chairman has stated already, and remind us that we have been immersed in the work and the discussion for the past 7 months, and this is a major feature that links to our strategic plan and strategic efforts. Of course, you know that our strategic plan is a 5-year plan, and we are now in phase 1 of implementation, which is reflective of year 1 and year 2. And we are in the midst of year 1 implementation of the 5-year strategic plan as we speak. Just to again echo a bit of what you have heard, the real emphasis and purpose of this extensive educational study is to really center on a comprehensive demographic facilities analysis, to take a look at the potential for choice options tied to centering on socioeconomic diversity and potential there. All of these things link to implications for student achievement, again, tied to the strategic plan. I mentioned opportunities for choice, but as we move forward, as the chairman mentioned, consolidation possibilities, also utilization concerns or issues or opportunities across our division as it relates to our individual schools, as well as the whole notion of increasing the socioeconomic diversity preschool implications for early learning, and engaging the community in the process was very important for us, so that the process would be reflective of community dialogue. And this afternoon is our opportunity to hear the net effect of the scenarios that will come to us from the DeJong-Ritchter group. Once you hear that, I would like to offer additional information that will center on supporting documentation or recommendations for the board's consideration linked to the report, and these recommendations will be those that are coming to you from the administrative team to lead and guide your work and for your consideration. Of course, we will remember that the final decision, of course, rests with the board in terms of where we go from here and the next steps, but we do feel that it is important for the administration to provide you with enough information and recommendations to link decision-making to the strategic plan, and so that we can stay focused on the needs of students and remain student-focused. With that said, I will defer to DeJong-Ritchter as an organization, and Mr. Tracy Richter as the presenter.
Thank you, Dr. King. Dr. Houston, members of the board, thanks for inviting me here today to come and talk to you. To reiterate Dr. Houston's comment, which is probably more profound than anything, is that I never approach a plan that's not called an educational facility plan, because they link together always. And I think if we've learned nothing else about our organization, is that we have a focus on that, and our concentration is to make sure that long-term there's student achievement that occurs because of moves that happen. And so to work in a process like this within a community is not always easy. We know that too. Those are hard discussions to have out there. I will talk about our steering committee a minute, because this is a group of people that have dedicated a lot of time and hours, been patient at times when they needed to be, but continue to press and continue to be not negative critics, but positive critics of what we need to be doing, because that's what we need. We need that critique to happen always, 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 to keep us in check. And at points, you know who you can count on too in a steering committee. Those people that come out and they're going to be there, they keep you informed, they're communicating with you. I get emails a lot, which is great, because I want to keep that communication open, because they need to understand process too. And Elizabeth does such a great job of communicating with everybody too. But I'd be remiss not to tell you how much I can appreciate your steering committee. Not only that, community members who've been to everything. I see them not at one community meeting, but they show up the next night to the next community meeting. Maybe to make sure the message is consistent, but they're there. And I will tell you that this is a city that loves their city, no doubt. And this plan has to reflect that desire to make this city better, not just the school division, but the city better. And so this plan was set out there to address a capacity, consolidation, to look for diversity, to look for opportunities for early childhood education, to look for those possibilities for that socioeconomic diversity that we want to look for. And as you go through these, what I'm going to present as kind of preferred options or recommendations today, we met all those goals. They're the first steps to it. And what we've said all along in planning is that, planning is about 10% of the work. The work's really in front of us for this. To implement, to go through and make those decisions, operational decisions, and to follow through on those are going to be very, very critical. Some of the decisions won't be easy, because they're not easy. But at some point, righting the ship or corrections that everybody goes through, and nobody has the patent on that in school districts, because everybody at some point rights a ship in some way in their district or division. Those aren't always easy rights. And so what we want to do is we're going to say, look, we're going to make this change, but it's beneficial to make the change, although it may be difficult. So as you go back and you look in the study, and I'm going to just follow along kind of in the process here, about how we engage the community. The intent was to really get out there and make sure that we were trying to communicate as well as we could, what our goals were, what what ultimately we wanted to do. We went out and talked to community members about how they feel about how close they live to their schools, drive time, walk time. And what we discovered is that, you know, there is especially at the elementary grade level, people want to be near their schools. They want some choice, and we understand that, but they want to be near schools. A neighborhood concept is alive and well in Norfolk, and that's awesome to hear. Because in neighborhood concepts, you know, the one thing we see when there's strong neighborhoods are strong schools. But they wanted to see this opportunity to diversify, to make sure that if we were going to do some things, they better be educationally beneficial. Believe it or not, there was support out there for grade configuration change. There was support out there for boundary change if it made sense. And it followed some rules of boundary changing. As long as it committed to communicating with the community, working with the community to do those things, those are accepted measures of how we move forward in school divisions. And so we felt like that first community dialogue really set forth some really good measures for us. However, what also it did was when we got into developing some options, it really made us start to ask some tough questions. And those tough questions we addressed in January altogether. And you know, it's amazing how many people I talked to in the community meetings that sat through 4 hours of YouTube to watch that after it was finished, and to watch what the discussion was, and understanding that all the questions weren't easy to ask, and they certainly weren't easy to answer all the time either. But we went through that process to make sure that we knew the things that we were going to do, definitely going to do, non-negotiables we call them, but the other things that we had some things where we could really move forward. And so that community engagement piece was really in line with trying to make sure we try to meet those goals and we try to communicate those goals, but always going back to your vision and mission. And that's what the introduction simply says in this document, is that's what it's intended to do, is to circle back around to make sure that you met those goals. And so if we get to, and I want to start with kind of those general recommendations that we'd like to move forward in a plan like this. And the first one, I don't make this recommendation lightly, is community engagement. Is that every step of a process like this, especially in change, it's not only about transparency, and although that's important, but it's a consistent, clear message that is always going out there and always going back to the reason we did this plan, the reason it's meeting the mission and vision, but this is the reason we're doing this. And so that community engagement, to go through with the implementation of things, is going to have to be communicated. And though time-consuming, though sometimes laborious, it is a necessary effort to walk into communities and explain to the community what's going on. And so that is why that is the first recommendation. It is not by happenstance, because we believe that will work, and it's worked here, and it's worked very well here. We are also going to recommend that when boundary changes have to be made, that there is a procedural effort to work with communities to help change boundaries. What we've discovered in boundary changes is that it is almost impossible to walk out with boundary changes already made and to tell people that's what it's going to be. That's actually PR. That's not community engagement. And so this recommendation talks about building boundaries with communities, helping communities understand that building boundaries isn't just about moving a boundary from Elm Street to Main Street. It's about feeder patterns. It's about grade configuration. It's about economic balance. It's about a lot of things that help shape what a boundary is about. And so, and what we started to discover in a process like this, which we started to really engage 4 or 5 years ago, is that when communities help build those boundaries together with you, that there's a better understanding and appreciation of why it has to be done. And look, it's never comfortable, no doubt about it, but you didn't enter this process to be comfortable, I don't think. But I think that that's part of this process, because we are going to recommend in time boundary changes, and those are going to be necessary in time. We also, we're excited about your transformation initiative, because we believe that that's a step in a direction to offer choice, diversity, programs that will make academics and achievement better. And whatever the pathway is, you're going to discover that in some of our recommendations of grade configuration that we've actually opened some space to allow those transformation programs to allow some choice. That's a big deal, we believe. Because remember when we first came out here and the demographics said, look, those 10 schools you're filling or want to put them in, they're all full. There's nowhere to put choice kids in them. And so we want to make some opportunities to do that, and through great configuration, we may be able to do some of that. I think it's a process again. I think it's a matter of, you know, Dr. King and his staff working through the implementation about timing when things will occur, and I'm sure he's going to talk about that some. But I think that that's a big part of this plan. School closure and consolidation. What you will see in this is there's two schools in this plan that look for a consolidation effort, and one will be Willoughby, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The other one will be Lafayette Winona, and the reason for these is that it creates some opportunities out there that we believe will work. That if we build a building in the north that is large enough, we can actually open up a building to provide an opportunity for early childhood learning centers, pre-K centers in the north part of the city, which means you start to have one in the north, one in the center, one in the south of the city, and you start to regionalize and start to expand this pre-K services that you so desperately want to do, and I know you do. But you need the space to do it first, and then you need the operational process to do that, funding, resources, all of that. But the first step is create an opportunity, and we believe that is one opportunity to do that in space. Lafayette Winona was always an interesting discussion in all this, and what we've discovered is that, and I'll talk about the option a little later, but what I want to reemphasize about Lafayette Winona is that one of the primary reasons this school was looked at was for geography. It is almost the center of everything in this district and can be a pivotal piece of this plan. And although the idea of closing a school is never fun, and school districts aren't in the business of closing schools, the opportunity a school like this can create for diversity, for program enrichment, everything that you want to do in a hub, it can be done. And so, but there needs to be a process to do that. And so, so there has to be a plan of transition. There has to be a plan of communication. There has to be a plan of program implementation. All those that follow this is not as simple as just saying we're closing a building. The intent is not to close an educational presence in this neighborhood. The intent is to enrich an educational experience in this neighborhood. And that's what we're trying to do with this action. We'll talk about that a little more. Campostella. Campostella, we believe is a priority project. In this recommendation, however, because of the demographics and what they show, it would be hard to recommend that in the first year of implementation of this building, after it's built and ready to go, to open any seats for choice yet. Not until you see what happens. Because no matter where we've been in this country, you open a school and these, what we call invisible students show up somehow, that live in neighborhoods that haven't been there before, or they're there, that they're doing something else, but they show up. And one of the things that we talked about, and to length we talked about, is the idea of creating neighborhood seats and then a child from the neighborhood showing up and there not be a seat for them. That's detrimental, and we know that. And so a process of opening a building is exciting, but it also can be stressful in that sense. That one of the things about Campostella and the original thought was to create some diversity here by bringing choice seats down from the north part of the city. But if we can't maintain what we got in the neighborhood first, we got to make sure we do that. We're offering an exciting program. The design and the program of this building are incredible. And once again, I'm going to tell you, a competitor of mine to help program that building, I'm going to tell you how good she is. The building has an exciting opportunity for this community. And I think that's the message that goes out there. It continues to be an exciting opportunity, exciting program. Dr. Simmons keeps updating me about the PDs she's doing, taking teachers and leadership to more professional development and how to make STEM better. That's exciting. No way around it. This is a priority project. Folks, there's going to be more work that needs to be done south of the river in time, and we know that. Let's get it started the right way with Campostella, and I think this is the exact right start that it needs. And so, and then finally, the last recommendation and a general recommendation is to establish a community oversight committee, using the core of the steering committee to watch over the implementation of the facility plan. This is a group that should meet maybe 2 or 3 times a year. You know, it's a good idea to meet, you know, after school starts and you get enrollments established to kind of see where they are. Do one more in the spring to kind of see what's going to happen the next year of implementation, and maybe in the summer to see how things are going as an oversight committee. I think this committee can be very valuable to the division, and there are some enthusiastic steering committee members that would love to serve on this and continue to serve. They have a vested interest in doing this, and I think they serve as a good core. But as we went out to the community meetings, we had people out there saying, how can I be part of this now? Can I be a part of this in some way, shape, or form? I didn't get on the steering committee. I wish I could have been. I'm here. How do I continue to be involved? So I think it's a good opportunity to do that. Now, let's move into the actual recommendations of facilities and what we do. The first one was, which I think is becoming more and more in line of our work across districts, is basically to align feeder patterns to make better vertical alignment of curriculum. Of looking at, to see the charge that, and actually I made it to our GIS guys, is to say, okay, if we could feed 100% of an elementary school into a middle school and keep the continuity of curriculum, keep the continuity of community together, can we do that? And after several nights awake, and Matt Sachs, our GIS analyst, and also working with steering committee members, discovered that there's a way to make every elementary school 100% feeder into a middle school. Now, what this does, interestingly enough, is that the first thing I noticed when I started to look at your feeder pattern was that Lafayette Winona Middle School had no elementary school that was 100% feeder into it. Every elementary school that fed into it split. Well, trying to get sixth graders into a single community to know each other, to learn a new building, to learn middle school curriculum, to do all that, is hard enough on its own. But when I start to throw 5 or 6 split elementaries into it, the challenge becomes more difficult. And so when you start to notice that, things like that, and then you notice that there are elementary schools that go into 3 middle schools, or elementary schools that go to 3 different high schools, the vertical alignment of curriculum becomes very difficult. And also when you're talking about trying to become accountable to the student. When a student gets to their sophomore year and they don't have the basic skills of English, math, science, there should be a way to track down to the root and figure out how you do that better. And it's not a disciplinary action. That's not what I'm talking about. It's a matter of systemically making it so you can find it. And so one of the big reasons behind the realignment of a feeder was to do just that. Now let me be very clear here. Feeder pattern realignment does not mean boundary change. There's a difference, because we can take a whole feeder and just move the feeder. Now, a boundary change could mean a feeder pattern change, though. Does that make sense? So that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to change boundaries here, although the middle school boundaries start to look different. But all along we said, if you're going to make high school boundary changes, you're going to make middle school boundary changes, they happen at the elementary grade level. Because those boundary changes are cultural. You build those through community and through continuity. And so if you can start to make sure that the cohort understands that that's their feeder pattern, that they're going to have choice within that feeder pattern, but we know that that's their feeder pattern from the day they walk in the door. And they don't walk into kindergarten and wonder if I'm going to go to Lafayette Winona or Blair or the next middle school over. So we believe that, and the other thing that this did was that as you start to look at the middle schools then, and you look at the new enrollment, the new utilization of those buildings, and you start to look at that free and reduced, which is our socioeconomic indicator, you start to see that I actually start to make some changes. You want socioeconomic diversity. You know, ironically, and I happened to be in Omaha, Nebraska yesterday, 75% free and reduced lunch in that city. 75%. I was talking to their leader of pupil assignment, and she said, you know where we create most opportunity for diversity? And I said, middle schools? She said, it's exactly where we start our diversity. And their goal is to bleed it both ways then. We start it there because that's our opportunity. And so if we can create that, and we can start to see, and we'll notice it when we start to talk about these other elementary grades, is that we can create some more diversity by choice then. And so our next recommendation would be to look at grade configuration changes for the following schools to then create some opportunity for either pre-K or K2 schools, primary learning centers, and then 3-5 buildings. This is, again, I've seen this in two school districts. One has seen very positive results. I haven't seen the results from the other one, but the idea is here is that primary learning centers, creating sister schools within a boundary, that in the primary learning center, kids are learning to read, that comprehensive reading skills are the primary focus. I believe one of the most outstanding studies done in the last 5 years comes out of the University of Chicago when they talk about comprehensive reading by the 3rd grade. And if you don't have it by 3rd grade, your chances of graduation reduced by 75%. Those numbers are staggering. So if our kids can comprehend to read by the time they get to 3rd grade, and our focus is reading, read, comprehend, and get that done. And we believe that K-2 schools can do that, that their primary focus is learning to read, and then, as Dr. King puts it so much better than I do, then you get to 3 to 5 and you read to learn. And that's so exciting for me in an educational plan. Now, what this does also, if you look at it, is that we have some challenges utilization-wise, and we know that. But what we also do is we see that there's some opportunity to create some choice seats within buildings. And especially at that 3-5 level when kids are reading to learn. And so those transformation initiatives that you think about, you have an opportunity to maybe create some choice seats within these buildings. And so that's just a win on this. Now, there is a, on this one, I think that the, in a feeder pattern, this is kind of something I have to make clear. We do have that combination of the Lindenwood and Jaycox, and in the feeder you will see that those schools actually feed to different middle schools. But the intent is to kind of keep like a ghost boundary over those anyway to show some linear alignment. But we found that if you kept Lindenwood in that Blair feeder pattern, then we could still reach that economic diversity we want to and balance some enrollment better. And so what would happen is in this, if this recommendation were moved forward, that you would see that 3-5, and then the kids would then go to their middle schools. And it's the only place that we saw that could happen. But we believe in a good transition plan that would be okay. And so again, using grade configuration to create opportunity on a lot of different levels is what this recommendation is about. So the next recommendation talks about the projects to build new schools, and obviously moving forward, the exciting opportunity about Bowling and Larchmont is that with the building capacity of those at the construction, we have an opportunity for choice seats because of the live-in attendance. Now, I think one of the things to think about here is, and we heard from the community, was this idea of you have some transfer students, out of district transfer students that come into some of these buildings, and what would happen to that. But I think the idea of choice is out of district transfers and choice opportunity. I think it's you can have the same conversation to continue to allow that to happen. Because the last thing we want to do, we talked to a lot of parents, and actually it was here. We talked to parents that came up and said, you know, we choose this elementary school to come out of district into this building for a reason. Well, that's choice, and that's what we want to continue to promote here. And so that was kind of the goal there. Now, on the other recommendation, this is a consolidation of Willoughby and Ocean View. This is where on the 700 enrollment, we're talking about the live-in enrollment of both. That combining those two boundaries and working during the construction time to make sure the merging of the communities is going to happen. So understanding that when if this consolidation were to happen, that those Willoughby students understand that they're part of one community now, and it's a one boundary community. And so working on a kind of a transformation initiative to make sure that happens and transforming it is a process to happen during construction. And there's so many great ways to do that, including having them part of the construction project with whoever you hire to do that. And I've seen that work so well, and they feel like they're part of the building, and all those kind of things that work, building the community together. And so that's the elementary recommendations. Do you want me to stop at elementary and then take questions? Do you want me to finish recommendations? How do you want to do that?
Certainly, yeah. We can do questions, because I know when you're finished, the administration is going to be making their recommendations based on what you shared. But certainly, now is a good time for questions.
In the conversation about economic diversity, so when we started down the path of considering doing the study, we were having conversations about the Campostella school.
Sure.
And at that time, we were considering increased seats. Because of the route that we went with school construction, we did not provide for those seats, although nothing's been built, so maybe that's still an option.
Sure.
But when the conversation, because I kind of raised it around the social economic diversity, we have several schools that I consider to be hyper poverty, 90% and above. And so part of the conversation was not necessarily, the idea was how do you get social economic diversity across the district, but in the beginning, how do you look at trying to reduce some of the hyper poverty schools that we have? So in your recommendations, if I can find it, it looks like to me that with, if I'm reading it correctly, that at the middle school level, at least with Ruffner, you are projecting that the new free and reduced lunch would actually increase. Is that correct?
That's correct. In that
Okay.
view.
And that at Campostella, you're projecting 93% if we follow the recommendations. Is that correct?
Which is the current live-in.
Which is the current live-in.
Yes, sir.
And I know I had asked you before, in your work around the country and based upon your research and assessment, where do you find models of continuous academic success? The reason that the issue came up around trying to reduce the concentration of poverty was because of the data that was showing that the stress that it causes teachers, staff,
Sure.
teachers, students, and so on. So even as you describe the exciting STEM program at Campostella or the exciting programs we may have at Ruffner, what data do you have from around the country that shows that programming trumps 90+% hyper poverty?
Well, I think that the thing that's always concerned me about this is not necessarily, although poverty continues to be a concern when we're always doing planning, and again, recognized by your community as one of the biggest challenges you face, it continues to be the size of school and making sure that the building is conducive to the population it serves. There are several examples of the country of high per poverty schools that succeed, and because school size goes to leadership and in the classroom ability, and that's where the research shows. And so, can we do it? Yes, but what we're trying to do here, though, is trying to create the balance of a community school also and access to buildings. And that when we don't have enough seats for neighborhood kids and those students need to go somewhere else for whatever choice they have, then you start to go down the domino of then what is the family access to buildings? Can parents be involved in a school that is across the river, 3 bus transfers away? Can they get to the building to be part? Because also parent involvement is big. When you look at successful, when you look at some of those successful organizations out there like the Buffett Foundation and even in the KIPP organization, one of the big things that they concentrate on is parent involvement. Buffett organization will not allow you to be in their schools. His daughter actually heads the organization. If you're not involved in the school, they won't let you in. And so we have to balance that a little bit. And I understand and this continues to be a concern that we talk about in the community, that if it remains a neighborhood school, we are in a hyper poverty area. And how do we make the education better in a big school? And I think that's my bigger concern. Now the building's programmed not to feel like 1,100. And if it has to grow to 1,300, and if you have the dollars to get to 1,300 to make choice seats come in, the challenge becomes greater. So one of the non-negotiables here was that Campostella goes. But one of the things that we talked about was that area as a whole needs more than Campostella. St. Helena is overtaxed. It's an area that has to pass. They don't have an opportunity for middle grades education in their neighborhood, but we don't have room for them either. And so on this side of the table, it became very difficult to plan for more choice seats, because if I've got St. Helena sitting right next door and they have to pass by that building, or they're very close to that building too. And I've heard about combining neighborhoods and, we can't combine those neighborhoods. Well, I've never seen kindergartners you can't combine. They're 5-year-olds. It's cultural. If we want to combine the communities, we can combine the communities if it's done right. That wasn't an option we were given, unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, and not just because Campostella is going, because we don't have more money to build more schools or more seats in that area or to improve conditions sometimes. But in this case, if I can't offer the St. Helena that next immediate, then there's some discussion as to where the choice comes from. Because I've got a St. Helena kid sitting right next to a brand new building and a great program that don't really have access to the building. And that's not choice to me, because there's not enough seats to do it. And so, are there examples out there of hyper-poverty schools that work? Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's plenty, and we know that.
Just to be clear, I'm not suggesting.
No, I know you're not, and you're very much supporting of this, and you have been a huge advocate of trying to make this better, and the correspondence you and I have had about sharing opportunities like that have been awesome. So, I think that the recommendation in the first year, but to keep an eye on it, has to be the recommendation, because we can't sacrifice the neighborhood seats.
Well, we'll talk about it. I guess part of my concern with that is, well, I guess what my expectation was when we started to go down this path is that you would provide us with some points of how to get it done. So whether it was money, whether it was space, whether it was whatever it was, if our goal was to try to not have any hyper-poverty schools, then you would give us some recommendations of what we may consider or have to consider to try to get there, whatever was on the table.
Mr. Jordan, on that, just very quickly, so I don't forget my point of reference here, is that I have suggested that St. Helena get a new building that was of more capacity, that can offer up seats in Campostella to kind of spread out a little bit to offer that choice to happen. And I've kind of been a little stalled on that one. But I truly believe, much in my introduction comment, that there's another building that needs to happen down there. And for a lot of reasons. I mean, St. Helena's a great school, it's a great program. This is not about St. Helena. It's about having enough seats and that kids aren't feeling crowded in buildings, that the site is appropriate for elementary education. And whether it's, I can recommend and make the recommendation because I believe it should be a recommendation. Now, what that means to you guys and what the next step is probably is in your court. It could be in your court. So I will, because this is still part of the discussion of recommendation, I don't think I've made that a secret that I think that should be out there. We've talked about it in steering committee quite a bit. I believe that needs there. If you can do that, then you create that opportunity for it to happen. And all you can do is create opportunity. Then you got to make it happen, of course. And so, but I think that's the way to start. And so I hope that better answers the question and being kind of more forthright about that answer in St. Helena.
And just the last comment. So I look at it from a longitudinal perspective. So in the mid to late 80s when we created these hyper-poverty schools, so let's say it's around 86. So now it's 2014. I think that's 30 years.
30 years.
30 years. So we've had at each of these high-poverty schools 30 years of challenge. There's been some up and down, but overall, in terms of being competitive at the level that we like to see them be competitive, it's been 30 years of challenge. So I'm just looking as we consider decisions in 2014 that may have impact for another 30 years, that if we're going to be able to say that we're going to take high-poverty, hyper-poverty schools and come up with some formula that's going to have success, that we are crystal clear on what that success is, and it's not a crapshoot.
Right.
Because I think we've done that for 30 years, and the definition of success would be questionable.
Right.
So I think it's important that we really drill down on that if we go down this path of creating even greater poverty when we started down the path of trying to figure out how to reduce it.
the comments that I think Noel and Courtney had a comment or question, that we would get kind of big rocks left from your presentation so that we could get to the recommendation from the administration, and we'll continue the discussion there. And we may need to make some adjustments to the agenda in order to really complete this discussion. So, Noel.
That you had made to Mr. Jordan regarding your recommendation about St. Helena. You said that in the background that there was discussion about building a new St. Helena, and that building a new St. Helena would possibly open up the opportunity to provide choice for Campostella as a K-8, because that way that building would be a new building, but it would still be a K-5 or a pre-K-5. I'm not sure.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the logic behind that, is that, you know, not every student is going to want to enter the rigor of a STEM academy. We know that, and that's okay. You know what? That's okay. And they may want the opportunity as an experience in a K-5 building, and then figure out what their feeder pattern is then, in there. But currently, by the number of students that live in the two boundaries together, we don't have the room to do that. There's no possible way to do that. We can't expand St. Helena. And quite frankly, your facilities guys have told us it's not a building worth kind of rehabbing in the sense for that. But that's the only way to do it, is to increase the number of seats for opportunities for neighborhood kids to stay within the general vicinity of their schools. And then you can open some seats at that K-8 building and allow that choice to occur in that sense. And that's why, and I think that, because the other thing that we thought about was, even though you have the pre-K program across from Campostella now, that maybe St. Helena could be rehabbed as an early childhood center, because the need is so great in that area that one facility doesn't do it. And so do you have another opportunity to do something like that with a building that you already own? Those are the things that were tossed around in here. And but that's how you create that opportunity. You got to get more seats. The school's small anyway, and it's just completely overtaxed. Yes, ma'am.
The question I have is related to your Willoughby and Ocean View Elementary proposal. The current enrollment, if you combine, is 791. With the new Ocean View, the capacity is 700. How do you get to the new enrollment figure with 704 from the 791? And are we, on paper, apparently opening Ocean View with not enough capacity, and do we need to consider a change?
That is your live-in attendance. You have students that transfer into those buildings from out of district that occur. And so what we try to do is we show the live-in number. And so that's your current live-in versus your enrollment. And so may this lessen some opportunity for choice seats to happen here? Possibly. But understanding that some of those kids from Willoughby or Ocean View may opt to go to another choice too. And so that's the reason that number is different. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Ruffner Middle School and the concentration of high poverty that is there. You've got a school like Richard Bowling that is going to have choice. What consideration has been given to trying to, obviously it's the neighborhood school setting that's competing with the idea of high poverty schools.
Sure.
With Richard Bowling, where you are expecting to have choice seats there, any consideration to pulling that school out of this concentration, putting it where, and one of the middle schools that is not as high poverty, that would then become more attractive to parents for choice purposes? Having looked at that balance of neighborhood schools versus concentration of high poverty, had you given any other alternatives to this particular series of schools being put together like this?
And this one took a lot of discussion. I actually really like your Richard Bowling idea. I mean, I think that's an opportunity that we can create here. Again, in that discussion of trying to figure out, the better feeder of where kids attend, that was a big deal to us, and trying to think about, and that number, for me, the Ruffner Middle School is of concern too, because of trying to get kids to a continuity of program and continuity of a neighborhood. Geographically, that's about where you are. Now, however, these numbers are just on paper. And when you start to talk about the opportunity a Lafayette Winona can produce for you, and then the choice it may produce at the elementary grade levels, and allow that to happen, I think there's where our opportunity to operationally take those hyper-poverty numbers down. And if you can, but that's an operational. What I can only show is the numbers about how we currently feed in. I don't believe that's how it will work. But in a full transparency, we have to show what that number is. But if we go down that Lafayette Winona discussion, the game changes dramatically because it offers so much choice and accessibility from all of these elementary schools because that geography is so tight in that area. Does that make sense in that?
It does. I'm just, I think that, to me, and of course this would be the choice that the board, the district would have to make, is whether that high concentration of poverty there is, whether we want to make that tough choice to dissipate that, to try to spread that, and then of course that would mean the lack of neighborhood schools and all of that. So, I mean, it's the elephant in the room. I mean, it's it's very stark choice here, but very, very defined. So.
And I hope, if nothing else, I mean, it's stark. It's right in front of you now. I mean, the elephant in the room has been exposed. He's not hiding anymore. And the numbers are what the numbers are, but because of what we've offered and some opportunities of some of this consolidation, grade configuration stuff, operationally it's going to have to work at this point. The numbers are, I mean, you're going to be, hopefully that number decreases in time overall with better schools and, that choice that people want to be attracted here. That's going to work. And so I think that's the core, though. You got to start there. But that's the goal of those grade configuration and even that consolidation of Lafayette Winona. I believe it is one of the goals.
And you'll look at that Richard Bowling?
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that remark right there, because that's a good one for me. I appreciate that. So then on the middle grades recommendation, here's the recommendation is, first of all, to see that alignment. The second one is that even, so what we did, one of the numbers that went out to the community that we talked about was about 3,000 empty seats at the middle grades level. But what we had to do is we had to go back to Rosemont and reevaluate the capacity of that building, because half the building's been converted to office and non-teaching space now. And so what we did was reduce that, but still looking at that middle school number of, roughly 23, you might as well call it 2,500 empty seats at the middle grades level. Now, opportunity for consolidation of a middle school, but an educational presence is still on the table here. One of the things that we have talked about at this level, at the board level, but even talked internally about, but because we don't have the feasibility of the study to fruition, is the opportunity at a middle grade school to offer a governor's program opportunity if we could. But some feasibility discussions have to occur there. We have to look to see if that is if you could do that, and if your facilities offer an opportunity to do that. Because we know that was one thing that we talked about at the board level that we want to look forward to. And so we're going to have some further discussions about a middle school possibly, that way reducing those middle school seats. The third recommendation is to close Lafayette Winona. And again, I want to make it very clear that the primary discussion around Lafayette Winona was geography, was the opportunity to be kind of the hub of this, and it creates that opportunity. The students surrounding in Blair, Lake Taylor, Norview, and Northside, I mean, these students would have to be redistributed to these buildings. We know that, and that would take a pretty intense community process of making sure people are informed what the transition is, what has to happen there. At the middle grades level, again, though no closure is easy, there's less grades and the number of students impacted, but every student's impacted. We don't take that lightly, and so we need to make sure a transition plan is in place for that. But you can see then what we do in this, and the suggestions from the steering committee, and this is the one place we put it because we thought this was important, but of leaving the building closed for a minimum of 1 year. Kind of, you've got to get it ready for the program you want to put in there. Discover what that program will be, whether it's an IB, whether it's another STEM opportunity, whether it's whatever it is. Also, the other discussion was looking at a grade configuration. Do you make it a 3-8? The original idea was a 3-8. Students coming out of those primary learning grades have a choice to go into this program at 3rd grade. And so there's a continuity of a grade entry level. And that's a really good idea. You don't want kids entering at kindergarten and 3rd grade, then 6th grade. And so you want to figure out if you can build that. But also to rename and rebrand the school to appropriately reflect the new identity, because that's what you want to do. Again, this provides an opportunity to be your hub of what you want to be doing. That the school should have specific focus. And the term we use a lot is laser focus on what you want to be doing. If you're going to make a decision to do something, and when we talked a lot about even on the academic side, make that decision, go all at it. Make it work, because you can make it work. And then the leadership and staff of the new facility should have the professional development necessary to be prepared for that program. And so the minute you open the door, you're not experimenting. This school's not an experiment. This school is a school that succeeds the minute you walk in the door. So that was the recommendation for the middle schools. Any questions on the middle schools? Okay.
First question, are you recommending we close one middle school and Lafayette Winona, or one or the other?
The recommendation is you should explore the closure of one more. Just at plus Winona.
Okay.
Because you're not going to get, the reduction of middle school seats occurs some, but remember, you're going to, if it stays open as a 3-8 or a K8, you still have middle school seats there. But we also see opportunities in your middle grades to create other opportunities, like we talked about the governor's school or whatever it could be. But that opportunity for, I mean, again, maybe another opportunity for a choice entryway.
Okay. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, Dr.
Very related to that. I'm referring first to page 7, item 4, bullet 3. You just answered that.
I did.
Now I go to page 11, item 3, missing bullet 5. The missing bullet 5 is Azalea Garden Middle School. Is by inference that what you may be suggesting might be that second closure?
No.
Gotcha. I didn't want to infer that.
Thank you for that clarification.
I didn't want to infer that because I didn't think that was your intent. So you're not referring to any potential suggestion. So if we add bullet 5 as Azalea Garden Middle School, then
This was, boy, that's a great clarification. We don't want nasty rumors getting around out there.
exactly. And so by this, you were just looking at the demographic distribution, and you saw that these are the 4 simple places that those students could go. By omission is not an inference of what you would suggest on your bullet 3, item 4 on page 7.
Dr. Sherwood, I appreciate that comment because that's exactly right. It's more geography. It's feeders.
Gotcha.
So kids wouldn't mess up their feeders. Thank you.
Thanks for responding.
As you go forward, or ask will come later from Dr. King, on the human being, people academic side, that's kind of where I'm focused.
Yeah.
So with Ruffner Middle School, did you all discuss the fact that for the 5 elementary schools that you're considering aligning with Ruffner are all focus schools or priority schools, that they are currently under academic stress?
We did.
Okay, and as part of that, will there be some recommendations? Will there be some, I guess, additional notes or things for us to consider in terms of easing that stress and burden on principals and staff and students and parents if we were going to go down the path of taking four schools that are currently under challenge and putting them all together in a middle school in a hyper poverty scenario?
Sure. I think that that was considered, but one of the ideas was that if we had that opportunity, and that's why, going back to Reverend Haywood's conversation about the neighborhood and those numbers and playing that numbers game, is that if those transformation initiatives occur and we're able to get division-wide students to attract to those buildings, to then have some continuity of program into Ruffner, that changes dramatically. And so, does that make sense? Does my logic make sense in that? Okay, so in the transformation initiative, that some of those schools that we look at to be pre-K centers, or I'm sorry, early childhood centers and then 3-5 centers, one of the reasons that we did that was to look at some opportunity to free up some space to offer choice. Now, if we can offer that continuity of program from those schools into a middle grades program at Ruffner, then that, again, that's systemic though, and it's cultural. And so the academic stress should be, the plan is to reduce the academic stress on those buildings to increase the performance of those buildings, to then put them into the middle school. The idea isn't to keep those under stress and then to feed that up there, is to create that choice to happen. And then Ruffner then has those choice kids that want to stay within the feeder. That's the goal of that. And so that's why the numbers, it's hard to say that the numbers are what they are, but they're not, they're going to change because they have to. The way that the alignment will happen, and if implemented and courageously implemented to do that, that will change. And so that was the goal there. And that was part of our discussion there.
And to be very clear, the schools that are proposed for transformation for choice, the only way that we are going to open up choice seats is if one of your proposed ways is to do the elementary split.
Mm-hmm. To make a sister school
Right.
scenario work.
Right.
For the Campostella school, you're talking about these invisible students that are going to appear. Is there, that would be very much like the Crossroads schools where students appear that we didn't know were there.
Yes, exactly, yes, sir.
But surely there must be a way of determining who those invisible students are so we can get a better idea of what that population might. I mean, they're invisible, but yet they're not. I mean, surely there's got to be a way to.
You know, because obviously we've worked in a situation where we've opened a lot of schools, and you've seen students show up, the shiny new object that attracts a lot of people. And we've always considered a 10, 15, even 20% in some areas of an enrollment jump, just as a acceptance of that. But to track them is, because once again, the students you're going to attract and how you attract them, where are they coming from? Are they currently have an opportunity for a private? I don't know that answer. Do they have a home opportunity? I don't know that answer. But typically what we see is that private school students, if they don't choose the private that they're in because it was closed or consolidated, first choose private again. And then, public becomes their third or fourth choice. And so we can't really count on that data a whole lot because that's so unpredictable. I don't have a good answer for you on this one, and I'm afraid I don't, other than estimating that every time we've opened a building in this country, kids show up. And so, which is not a bad thing. We know that. We just want to be ready for them. That's all. And that's, again, go back to the recommendation of, can we open choice the first year? I'd be hesitant to do that, because the last thing you want to do is put a portable in a brand new building.
Okay, so we're about 10 minutes away from the designated time to end this session. We need to make a decision on the agenda so that we can continue on. The only other item that we have on the agenda, of course, is the school improvement academic review. The policy on the diploma seal is a relatively easy matter that can be done in 60 seconds. I'm sure if you had a chance to read it, it's pretty clear and simple. So I need a recommendation on the academic review. We need to finish this discussion without question. Juan?
We have Mr. Richter here.
Yes.
It's hard to get him here in the snow. It's a rare day that it's not snowing, and Tracy Richter's in Norfolk.
That's the truth.
And I say we take advantage of Tracy Richter being here.
Get him the heck out of here.
I agree.
So it doesn't bring any more snow.
No
Is that a
offense.
motion?
No, not yet.
Is correlation between you showing up and so
It is bad. I apologize for that, too.
Not causation, but correlation.
No,
This discussion was scheduled to be 90 minutes, which would have ended at 3:30. It is 3:20. I'm thinking we need another hour on this. We have not received the district's, the administration's recommendation. Anything less than an hour to continue on with the discussion, I think we'd be fooling ourselves. I think we need to move the academic review. We have the information. I'm not saying it's not important, but we started this discussion. I think we need to complete it, but I need a recommendation so that we can.
I'd like to recommend that.
Okay. Any disagreement?
Yeah, but we'll just move forward. I mean, the academic review is what we have to deal with now, but I understand the conditions that we have, so.
Okay.
I won't ask any more questions so we can get to the academic review.
I'm sorry.
I won't ask any more questions so we can get to the academic review.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean,
We have that on tape.
And I'm on my last recommendation for this is to turn over to administration, so if
okay.
that helps.
Let's see what
Alex.
happens.
The other thing too is we do have an hour in between.
We should go to 6:55.
No,
What
not
else is,
suggesting.
why not? We do it all the time anyway.
Okay.
Okay.
We will need some transition time is the point I'm trying to make. We gotta go to the gym and get set up and then, unless we're gonna start the public hearing late. And I like to
No,
try
we
to
didn't
avoid that.
start that
Yes.
late.
Okay. Tracy?
So just moving on to the high school recommendation. The high school recommendation is, again, the initiative to move forward on a comprehensive career and technical school. Once again, this is such a great opportunity for the city of Norfolk and students of Norfolk. But it's going to take some transition to happen. The idea of a $60, $70, $80 million high school might as well be $1 billion at this point. And so, but we may think about how we do this in transition without a new building first. And you start program initiative before you start building initiative. And that's okay to do that, because you can do that. But in order to start to make that transition happen, again, the academics are in order. The pathway's there. The identity of what you want to be doing is there. Everything's there. You just don't have the facility to do that. But, you know, I think that you do have some opportunity to start. Now, if that's the case, I think there has to be a transition plan of boundaries that occurred. One of the things we talked about was that you're going to make, you're going to take 5 boundaries and reduce them to 4 on paper again. But you have to make sure those established boundaries occur, which again will take a process to happen. And it's not an immediate process. Developing the boundaries like this, again, will start at the feeder level. And then, and as noted on the map here, this is only an example of boundaries. So all those people at home that are zooming into 790% on their, to look for a street that boundary is on, please don't do that. Because what we wanted to do was show that there's a possibility to make the to balance. And that was kind of the intent of that exercise. But the idea here is that because you're going to have the capacity overall in the division, making a transition to the comprehensive career and technical high school may be a good idea programmatically to start doing. But to do that, we're going to have to start establishing some of the parameters about where students will attend and how they will attend in their feeder and their boundary and time. And so this recommendation actually talks to the boundary transition and the program transition, that in a facility utilization, the recommendation would be to start to do that review in the next year. Get that in place of the transition of where the feeders are going to be, where the boundaries are going to be in the new idea of a comprehensive career and technical school. And so that's the final recommendation on the high schools. Thank you, Dr.
I have one question since you allowed it. Since you allowed it, just in terms of your data, the GIS, the scenarios, the things that you were giving us to to us before, when we could draw squares and so on. Do we have access to that?
You don't have the capability to do GIS internally yet. You have, I don't know, Dennis, do you have the program? Do you have the program there? But it's a matter of the resources to do the data. The data is yours. We'll turn it over in the Esri database, absolutely yours. It's just a matter of being able to work the data, but it's absolutely yours. Yeah.
Can we get a copy of the data set, please?
I mean, there's advanced certification. Tracy's people have gone to school for a long period of time to learn how to do all of this stuff. So it's not easy. It requires, again, an expensive application, art view.
What exactly are you saying, Mr. George?
Making sure that
we can certainly do that.
Involved quite a bit more than what he might expect. Not like Excel spreadsheets.
Okay. Yes. Sure.
So if we take Lake Taylor out of the picture for 1 year, how are we going to distribute the students at Lake Taylor to the other high schools while we're trying to program the CTE high school without putting in overcapacity at the other high schools that are available?
In that scenario, the answer is you can't.
Okay.
Okay. However, if the idea is to progressively make a transition occur, and so, and there's 1,000 different scenarios you could go with this, but say for instance you wanted to make the boundary change progressive over the next probably 3 years, because you've got one cohort leaving. And then allowing that 10th grade population, or wherever the number starts, and I have to defer to Dr. Savigny on this, but having the cohort start in a year, so the building's never empty, actually. And so however you make that transition, and it may be that part of, you're making kind of a neighborhood shift out and then making a division-wide choice in, but those neighborhood kids still have the choice of the career and technical. So hopefully you wouldn't have to close the building down for a year to make it happen, is what I'm after. That way you don't overburden the other schools.
But we would have to be very crafty of how we would offer the program in a building that doesn't have the program currently in it.
And the space types that may
Right.
not be there. And so, and it
Right.
may be because a lot of, especially at the early grade levels, the 9th and 10th grade levels, you're talking about theory over practicum.
Right.
And so typically is where you're at, even though you want more hands-on and project-based, but typically an introduction coursework, which you have the spaces to do a lot of that kind of stuff already in your high schools. That's why high schools are good to make this transition to.
Okay.
So I think that's, the answer is that you couldn't close the building and not expect to overtax your existing
Right.
high schools.
Right.
Thank you.
So, Chairman, you see members of the board?
I would like to offer further information based on the discussion that has taken place by the administrative team connected with the scenarios that you've heard. And for us, this means a focus on an intent to position the organization to better position itself, to begin to better position itself to provide services to all students, with the whole notion in mind of course, the socioeconomic diversity that we may not be able to secure at the level that we would like overnight, but to begin to build the framework where we can open the door for that to happen over time. And time is going to be the moving target that the board is going to have to enter into some discussion as a governance team around what does that mean? How much, how soon, or how little over a phased-in period of time. And so, again, though, the notion is to position the system to be able to better provide services in a way that we're going to be able to ultimately increase the percentage of students meeting and exceeding standards, moving toward the whole full accreditation piece. With that said, we recommend that the board consider further discussion and implications for the for the following options. First off, recommendation number 1, which is the elementary school recommendation. We recommend that the board consider further discussion and implications for that particular option and allow the administration to move forward with the same. Here's what we feel that means for our elementary schools, that it allows us to take a look at those feeder patterns that were mentioned, because right now we do not have those. And the benefit of that whole notion and endeavor will be to create the cohorts that we feel would be more powerful in terms of being able to hone in on the needs of students. So when you are able to create cohorts from elementary to middle, then you also open the door for, of course, the cleaner feeder patterns into middle school, but also what we refer to as vertical articulation, where we're able to communicate from the middle school level to the elementary level around the SOLs and curricular implications there. At this point, that's a bit fragmented, and we're not able to build what we call the longitudinal approach for staff, which means professional learning communities, in terms of creating those professional learning communities as cohorts at the elementary level that will also plan with the cohorts at the middle school level. This will open the door for that opportunity, and further recommendations will follow that we feel will open the door to ultimately begin to place a finger on the pulse of what it means for us to build more choice, especially at the middle school level, and increased socioeconomic diversity, especially at the middle school level. So again, recommendation for further consideration for the recommendation number 1.
So, let me jump in there. One of the things I noticed on the elementary school list here with the vertical alignment with middle schools, Nose and Helena, you may have mentioned it.
Yeah, and I saw that too, so I'll make sure it's in there.
Well, currently it is, but it's not on this chart at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in line with that recommendation, the notion of timing is going to be a key for discussion as well. For example, if we decide to move forward with that recommendation, then of course we need to enter into planning. We need to enter into the types of changes that the governance team may decide to suggest to tweak that particular recommendation, if at all. Of course, we will continue as an administration to go deeper with what this means and in terms of moving forward. But when you determine timeline, for example, do we take 2014-15 and continue the planning piece to make this happen, and so that we are really honing in on what this means for community change? And so when it impacts the community, then it gives us the opportunity to now talk about specific options that we are planning to roll out. And it gives us 14-15 to begin to do that planning as well as dialogue with those specific communities that would be involved for input and feedback, with the notion of implementation 2015-16 school year. Now, there are pros and cons around that, and so as a governance leadership team, we're going to have to consider that. What do we do immediately, and what do we phase in? It's going to be extremely important in reference to that. So I threw out those timeline indicators just as examples of what could be considered and what could be the pros and cons around that. So know that that's going to be an item of interest throughout each recommendation that I'm going to further discuss with the board.
So Sam, you're proposing planning during the 2014-15 school year for implementation in the fall of 15-16. Okay.
So again, the question will be around, as we do so, do we see the urgency around X number of the options
that will rise to the level of modifying some of this to tweak it to get more of what we want? That's one question. And do we see the urgency of modifying such a timeline?
Okay.
The benefit in that type of timeline is that you're able to go to your public that's being impacted by it and have specific discussion around it. And in my view, the potential disadvantage is that it takes you another year to make it happen. And so, but at the same time, we do have a plan that we will be working around professional learning, professional development, tied to all of these things, with training of teachers, training of principals, all of the above. That's also a part of the proposal in the budget that's on the table that should be beneficial even going into next year if the board chooses to spend next year building the necessities here.
Okay.
Dr. King, I'm one of the most impatient people I've ever known. It's just terrible, but I'm very gleeful at this report. My personal reaction was I hoped that when we had Andrea's wonderful report and Rex's wonderful report and Dr. Birdsong's wonderful report on salary scales and all of this, I had hoped would have occurred by Christmas so we could be talking about not wasting time and moving next year. But right now, I fear until this board has the opportunity for extended periods together. We love extended periods together. We're going to need a lot of time together between now and June, and then with the leadership, the governance leadership team at the retreat in July and whatever. I think this is going to take a lot of time. I personally have taken my normal impatience and put it on suspension. I think we are on the cusp of making some really big and wonderful decisions. I cannot think about pushing anything. I do think that the wonderful idea of having a 5-year budget planning process so that the city leaders see that we have a long-term plan for making these things. I can't think of anything, but I will, when we talk about budget, be talking about some things that might fit into what you're asking, such as the line item for CTE or moving more pre-K positions. But I personally am thinking 15, 16, to give you the time to have the conversations with the community, to give us the time to have a master coordinated, articulated plan. But it's not my style to be so patient, but I'm leaning towards more of that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you on that one. Certainly, I'm anxious to hear the academic potential benefits, socioeconomic impact in terms of diversity, and certainly the number of students that would be impacted. So the children in those boundaries now that currently attend one school that would now begin to attend another middle school. Definitely want to know an idea of the number of students impacted by that. And being that it's March now, to really be able to flesh that all out in time enough, along with the community conversations, a time to really implement any portion of it this fall is probably pretty ambitious. But I like the thought of it.
There's one additional thing. With all the wonderful things that we're going to be doing forward in preparation for the transformational initiative that will be going on over the summer and continuing, I want to make sure that you and your teachers, you and your principals and your teachers have enough time to do the important work of teaching those kids while we try to flesh out a master plan and get your support for that and then to get the community support for that.
So I would say, as we receive these recommendations, keep in mind that we'll need to make some decisions today in terms of giving the Superintendent Administration the support to continue planning and exploration of certain recommendations, so on and so forth. So we would be prepared so that when we walk out of here, we're clear on what our next steps are, because these are very clear recommendations that are coming before us.
And along that same line, if there are any variables attached to certain recommendations that you would like for the administration to consider that are not mentioned, now would be the time to do that as well. Of course, you will have other opportunities, but right. Since the team is together, the best approach, the better approach of those with those two will be
to put that on the table now, and the team here determines that jointly, that's what you want us to consider, right, for example. Right. Rather than, of course, we're happy to receive your inquiries after this, but then when you receive those inquiries, they're individual inquiries, and it makes it difficult to determine whether that is the wish of the whole. Right. So, but I will reiterate that with each of these recommendations, it is going to be of paramount importance to determine the whole time factor. Mm-hmm. And as an administration, if the board gives us the green light to move forward with our planning and providing of information to the board on how these things could be implemented, the time factor is going to be something that we're going to take a huge look at to, if necessary, to tweak what I just gave you as an example of the rollout, because time, in my view, is not our friend. Right? And so the other pieces that what we do, we want to do it with quality, so that we're ensuring that what we do is going to make a difference for students, because that's the issue at hand.
Right. Are there any other recommendations other than recommendation 1?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
that's what I'm waiting to hear.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
I'm gonna give you some of Warren's patience. He's
all right. The next piece is that we recommend that the board agree to further discussion and implications for recommendation for elementary school 2 to accept it with modifications. And of course, you know, this is the option that allows us to take a look at carrying of schools in terms of partnering and a deep look at school configuration with an emphasis on the early learning piece, which is the pre-K 2, also and 3-5. And these are schools that represent high poverty, and you know what we talked about in terms of the research the research that relates to literacy. And the emphasis here would be on the lower end, a strong focus on literacy, and the whole notion of bringing students to the point of being ready to read on grade level and above by 3rd, and the notion on infusing the rigor that we've all talked about in the transformation process and plan with those themes that will be infused in that process. Now, know that this is and can be a connection with recommendation number 1 in the feeder pattern piece as well, because as we see this happen over time and we look at what we're going to recommend for on the middle school end, then ultimately it will begin to, with these partnering schools, potentially begin to open the door for offering choice from these schools into other opportunities, and also ultimately choice in these schools back in, ultimately possibly if we can build in those seats. So it opens the door for other options for the schools that we refer to around partnering as well, if those seats are created at the middle school level and also at the elementary level with some other options that you're going to hear in a few minutes. Now, I said accept with modification. Let me attempt to be clear on what we mean by that. The whole notion of Camp Allen partnering with Sewell's Point, that pairing, the discussion there centers on the whole construction plan for Camp Allen that has already begun. And so that would be one that we would consider to do further review as to whether that should be pulled off the table in terms of those two partners. And so further discussion around that, because that's moving forward already in reference to construction as it relates to Camp Allen. So any questions on that particular recommendation? The whole notion of timeline comes into play here in the same concept as we mentioned earlier.
Who other than Courtney?
Okay, as far as variables to take into consideration when coming back to the board, I think that extensive community feedback is going to be necessary for separating the two buildings and what I'm thinking of is parental situations. For example, if you have a kid you're trying to get on the bus for one school and a kid you're trying to get on the bus for another school, coordinating time, coordinating events. So those schools would be two separate schools, but would probably have to operate very, very similar because of the sibling factor. So I think that we need to have a lot of feedback as to how parents are receptive about this, and then some proposals as to what we would do to ease the separation, because I know that at Little Creek there's two separate buildings, but they both function the same. I'm not suggesting that this is, this sounds like a good opportunity, but I think we really need to think through some possibilities and scenarios for parents with children in multiple grade levels.
The other thing I'd like to see some follow-up on regarding this is, Tracy, you mentioned that you know of 2 schools so far that have executed this model. One, you have not seen the results yet, and the other, there's been success. I'd like to see all the data related to that. When I say all, within reason, obviously, but I want to see how it's working in these other locations.
Okay.
Because this would be really quite a change, and I think we need to do study extensively on this model.
And to your point more generally, and of course there's a statement here that research indicates an emphasis on comprehension before grade 3 dramatically increases the chance of graduation. To include general research just on that being, I guess, greatly enhanced with the primary centers versus the K-5 schools. Sure. Not doubting its legitimacy, but I think it would be helpful to,
And we'll continue to look at the research, and of course, the team has begun to do that. But I would suggest to you that my prediction is that we want to see examples of highly successful models like this, and you're going to see examples of models that weren't successful like this. Just as with K-8, you know, you see examples of highly successful K-8, and you see examples of K-8s that were not so successful. And by that I mean it is going to be connected to the fidelity of implementation. Right. And so, and the rollout, and the planning, and the training, and all of those things are going to come into play with success around this. So, you know, we will continue to bring the research around examples of I think it'd be interesting for the board to see examples of where it worked,
Yes.
and then examples of where it did not,
Especially
and
in
why.
settings such as our own.
Sure.
Norfolk's a unique
Sure.
setting.
Sure. And then the other piece will be, at the same time, we've got to have the plan B moving forward, because the next item of consideration would be the structure which reflects the status quo. And so we continue with the status quo, then what will be different around that, outside of what we already have moving forward with the transformation training and professional learning and all those things. Of course, we're going to continue that, but then we'd be interested in knowing that we're going to go forward with taking a look at what we think Plan B should be. Okay, so.
The impact of this plan on PB Young and all of the new initiatives that have been taken in PB Young, progress that you have made, and just would like to know, how we're going to continue those real positive things that are happening there if we move to this plan.
I feel that is a really an enhancement of that. It allows us to continue that partnership, and allows us to take that partnership to the next level. Part of our discussion has been around which schools are, as far as their site-based readiness, may be ready to enter into the same type of partnership. So at this point, we don't see that this would interfere with that partnership. We continue that support and continue to finesse that.
History of Norfolk is under recommendation 2, Dr. King. Norfolk has done this before. we had this pairing before. The second thing is, as you put in requests and hopes for professional development, I think the articulation around themes is it may change. You may have to look at that, but I really don't see us coming to a master conclusion on everything before early August with the time that the school board needs to consider all these pieces. I just want to be realistic. But I do think that the theme with our transformational initiative, the theme issues and articulation is very, very important. But this is not something radical. This has been done in Norfolk, and there's only one aged person in this room, Mr. Fuddy, that could tell you about that. But I do have one item that's going to come up, and I'm not sure where to bring it, so I'll just bring it up here. When it comes up, I'd like the board to have a chance to chat about it, and for you and your colleagues, Dr. King, to recommend for Winona K-8 or K-3. I'd love to see what y'all would prefer for that in the mix of the whole thing.
And I would remind the board that the discussion around transformation has centered on, for JCOX, of course, the STEM emphasis and focus in NASA Hub, as well as with Lindenwood around the IB and preparation for pre-IB at the elementary level into that whole notion of rigor infused. So that continues, and that planning also would continue. And for PB Young, of course, we've discussed the Montessori strategies and the partnership that we just alluded to, as well as rolling it out in that same format for Tidewater. So that doesn't change any of those items with the themes and the whole notion of wanting to move forward in a way that we build opportunity for choice as well. But remember, even in these schools, when this is done at a high level, it builds an opportunity for students within these schools to have choice options at the middle school level as well. And once we do a future recommendation, it also builds the opportunity and opens the door for students in these schools to have choice options into some other elementary opportunities as well. The last piece on recommendation. I want to have a quick comment.
There's one thing I want to bring up, Dr. King, so that we don't do a lot of planning. We had a wonderful letter last year from the mayor regarding, and it mentioned Tidewater Park in a glowing way. If Clydewater Park has some other destiny, that's something we need to determine now as we're starting to work this out. Dr. Houston, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And that is something that we would need to have. We don't want to have. We don't want to have the destiny of one school. As you work out a great new plan and in September present it to us, and then all of a sudden. So I think that's going to be important. And Mr. Richter, you don't have the benefit of that.
I'm going to polish my crystal ball on that.
All right. Yeah. I just do think we've got to have a chat to see if the wonderful destiny there is. I don't want it to go unsaid, right? Because we got to do it, and that's something that influences all that you're trying to do in coordination. Sorry.
And the last item I placed on the table in reference to recommendation for elementary school 2 concept is that it also opens the door for us to have the opportunity to build community partnerships for early learning, and so that in a way that we can pull more of the early learning need from those schools into a community concept where we partner with facilities that are available. And so further discussion would be needed around that, which could open up some additional seats, and we talked about that too. So we'd like to be able to enter into that kind of discussion as well. So ultimately, choice options out to take advantage of the themes, and also choice options in once we build this process to a point where it is attractive to other families across Norfolk. So with that, I would like to move to the third recommendation, and it is that the board consider allowing the administration to move forward with the further discussion and implications for the recommendations and centering on elementary school 3, and accept that based on construction timeline. And so, of course, providing transportation will be a moving target for us, because this one is the notion of Richard Bowling, the new Richard Bowling being built. with its partnership as well, being a part of the whole partnership with the Kroc Center and IB initiative and all of the plans that's there. But hopefully and ultimately being able to take a deeper look at how can we look at X number of seats for choice that could be utilized to transfer into that particular school, because that would be a new state-of-the-art building as well. So again, based on construction timeline to accept the Richard Bowling concept, as well as accept the Larchmont Elementary concept as a new structure, but building this school as a new Larchmont Elementary, but opening up the seats for choice, which means that it gives the opportunity to open the door across the system for students to look at the X number of seats that could be open in Larchmont for particular choice endeavors. And so that's a recommendation there. Any questions on that particular one?
So we do, the capacity for, Dr. Simmons, for both these schools are currently scheduled for 700. Yeah, okay.
Just a comment, this is tangential, very tangential, Dr. King, but because of the master planning we're going to be doing, and because of the important nature of the PPEA and all that's involved, Dr. Simmons and Mr. Gay represent us well at meetings with the city folks on this. But in those meetings, the only person that's a project manager that I know of that's ever really built schools is Mr. Fowler, who's worked with us to do 8 schools. I really, Dr. Houston, I strongly need for a school board member to be an ad hoc member of that, to keep us all appraised on the school board of making sure programmatic changes in our master planning. So I really need, this is Dr. Houston, for our board to make a decision whether a school board member, Dr. Simmons, could be an ad hoc member like Mr. Fowler. Remember, the person who knows school construction that's in there are not the folks at the city. They've really never built schools. Mr. Fowler has. Fortunately, we have a project manager. Every school I've ever built, we had to have a project manager. But the school board needs to really be knowledgeable about what's going on, because it has implications for all these other things we're going to be doing. So it's not related to anything for you, Dr. King, but the school boards need to be in that meeting to make sure that programmatically everything's fine. I'd like the school board to have a conversation about that, and for the next meeting there to be a school board member there. And so, again, I don't know if there's voting going on, but it just has to happen. School board has to know what's going on in that area.
And keep in mind that all of the recommendations thus far related to with the partnering of the schools, potential partnering of the schools and neighborhood conversations, protect the opportunity for those students to maintain their seats in their communities, but also begins to open the door for them to ultimately have the opportunity to take advantage of choice in other schools as we build that, with the partnering schools that we mentioned earlier, as well as protecting the seats for students that currently reside in the Richard Bowling area, unless the board suggests differently. That's where we are now, as well as protecting, from a residential standpoint, the students that currently reside in the zones for Larchmont, but building additional opportunities for students to take advantage of choice and other seats in those schools, so that we could have transfers in as well for the whole socioeconomic piece and strengthening of the system as we described in the strategic plan. With that said, I will move on to the next. Yes, sir.
Yeah, but specifically to the Broad Creek School, you all factored in the proposed housing that's supposed to take place on the north side of Princess Anne Road in terms of your live-in numbers? I mean, live-in is what it is today. And on the north side, you've got a significant area that's supposed to be right next to the school that is projected to have a significant amount of housing. So did you all look at that in your calculations? And if so, if housing gets built around around the new school, are you going to come back later and say that new housing, new school, therefore those that may have opted in before the housing was built would now lose their seats? I mean, I just want to know if you all had any discussion about that.
We did not consider that housing growth initially in this, but it's something that we'll have to factor back into that equation then.
Yeah, I think with that particular school, with the land that's available and things were put on hold as the housing market slowed down, but now that the market is starting to heat up and you have the Croc Center, you have new grocery stores, you have other things happening, I would anticipate there's going to be some impetus to see that housing go forward. So I would just, like I said, some other things in the pit of my stomach that I'll save for the end, but in this particular one, you may want to have some additional discussions with folks at the city and the housing authority and others to see where that is before you make the, if you go with that neighborhood model with the models that we have, that you would have those seats available, or for how long you may have them available based upon the schedule for development. So.
Swap as well with RJ for the property right next to current Campostella School, and then the housing plan behind it.
Campostella.
Dream Campostella's there now. Then that's the old Moulton Park.
Right.
Isn't that the old Moulton Park area there?
Yes, gone, but yeah.
Right.
That's in there.
Yeah. So we will communicate with NRJ. Get more facts on where they are with those plans.
Yeah, and I feel that those are examples of variables that could modify or limit the number of seats that we may have for choice immediately. And so will be important in the planning process in terms of what we would project that would mean for the free reduced lunch rate in those schools in order to monitor that as well. So.
Also, we talked about the school piece, but just staying on the Broad Creek School for a moment, because as we've talked about potentially those students now feeding into Ruffner, that the challenge or the goal has been to try to marry the housing with the school. So if we accept a pathway that says to those families that now you may end up at a school with higher concentrations of poverty, then it may have impact on the value of the housing, the people that would choose the housing. So I just think when we look at that particular school and some of these other configurations, that right now we're primarily focused on it from a school perspective, but I think we have to look at it from a big picture as well, from a overall quality of life and demand for the city as a whole. So in that particular one, because there is housing that's going to come up, and you all mentioned Tidewater earlier and some others that are slated to be in development or redevelopment areas, I think it's going to be important that we consider that bigger linkage.
And so with that, we'll include as a variable to look at the impact of this on possible increase in poverty at the middle school level, and that whole notion of what may be some options to tweak that, if any. So that would be a piece that we would also look at. The next one is a recommendation that we accept elementary school 4 in terms of that particular option based on construction timeline. And with this one, of course, this is a new Ocean View Elementary. It would allow us to remove the pre-K from Ocean View, possibly, and build Ocean View as the K-5 with choice seats built in, so that the notion of having choice from across the city for X number of students would be our intent. And of course, with all of these items, when we talk about choice, we have to build in criteria and process and lottery and all of those things to determine how we do this, and with specialty programs. And of course, Norfolk has done that and we have special programs in place now, but we want to make sure that what we do in terms of building in the processes, the procedures, that we're doing it in a fair and equitable manner. And for us, it means to repurpose Willoughby in terms of what we have currently. Because if we're going to remove the pre-K from Ocean View, then it gives us an opportunity to focus on Willoughby as an possible early learning center and emphasis that we can open up in terms of opportunities for across the community there as well. We would like to also continue to look deeper at that whole choice notion for that particular scenario, and look at implications for limitation on slots, and again, keeping in mind the residents that are there and protecting seats for the live-in and the zone implications, again, unless the board decides that it would like to suggest other variables to consider with that. With all of these, the reminder for me is that the time factor is something that we want to look at in terms of suggesting to the board the rollout, and would like for the board to consider what's urgent and what should happen tomorrow and which piece, so that we can begin to work in that direction. So.
Mr. Richter, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. We have, as Ms. Doyle has identified, new capacity 700, new enrollment 704. So we start off needing a trailer. Now, I know many systems that have started off after construction with surprise visitors, Mr. Richter, and all of a sudden there were trailers in a new construction, Loudon being one, a very big system in Northern Virginia. But Mr. Richter, for my other board members who don't have the nationwide coverage that you do, is there anything harmful about 730? Have you seen other elementary schools that do very well? See, I'm being tricky. Across the country with 730, because if we start off in the hole and there is a possibility that we're going to roll trailers in to accommodate some of these things, I think it would be a negative thing. So please speak to the idea. I know you have to choose some guiding principles, and 700 is the guiding principle that you've chosen, but please help all of us understand about the elementary schools. Sometimes I'll have a lot more, don't they?
Right, absolutely. I mean, we do 1,200 elementary schools across the country. I think that maybe, and I should have noted this, the 704 includes pre-K population in the boundary. So that helps. Okay, and I apologize for that. As Dr. King said that, I'm thinking in my head, we counted all pre-K in that number too. So that helps. But school size, again, determined by how you program schools, how you do that best. I think, and if I'm not mistaken, you just said, what is the guideline?
St. Helena, too.
Yeah.
Remember, you had the issue of St. Helena.
That's
You've already
correct.
identified us, not in this report, about the issue of St. Helena and the comparison with Campostella. I just want us to do the right thing the first time and not to be rolling in trailers immediately. So
I concur. I think that the guideline of the 700, if I'm not mistaken, is budgetary and getting to where you wanted to be as far as that went. But look, a 750 school, whatever the cohort is, I mean, you just make the school work and make sure it's designed and programmed to feel small.
I've seen them all over the state. I'm sure you've seen them all over the country.
No doubt.
I ask those questions for our quality board members who haven't had that experience.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Warren. I think it was me.
But you're,
Say that one more time.
Ocean View currently has 4 pre-K classes,
So that's 72.
18 per class.
So it's 72. So you're,
According to,
yeah, I would just echo, that's why I asked the question before. I just don't want to open a door and have it closed.
Yeah, that's more long-term harm than good.
Right, and then, you know, if we're not able to expand it, or if it didn't take into account that we can do pre-K somewhere else, do we need to consider some of the students going to Camp Allen instead? You know, do we look at it to shift that way? So I just ask that we remain open so that we don't have a closed door on a new construction.
Mr. I might suggest that on when you saw the PK1 or the PK2 scenarios where we saw those above 100%, we should look at boundaries at that point to see if it makes sense sibling boundary, for all those kind of things. I think that makes a lot of sense because you will have to play with that a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Throw an idea out there from a very strong parental perspective. I like the idea of considering pre-K hubs. I know that we have Berkeley Campostella Early Childhood Center, and I know that we're considering it for Willoughby. But if one of our main priorities is to attract and retain strong families, when you begin your children in school, and if you're looking at a pre-K environment, if you build them within that building, they're going to, let's say for example, Willard, and they start out at Willard pre-K, and the pre-K program is very good, then those parents are going to be more likely to continue into that school. And if we want to try to keep those schools diversified with strong families, because I see pre-K as our outlet for attracting back in families to Norfolk Public Schools, because we are the only city in almost the entire state, I know, in Hampton Roads that offers full-day pre-K, and we're trying to expand to incorporate our wait list, and then even more so for all the 4-year-olds down the road. So if we need to do some research with families to say, if you were to attend a pre-K hub, would you still attend the elementary school that's within your new feeder pattern or zone or whatever you might be? I think we need to look at it, because what we don't want them to do is attend the pre-K program but then still pick which school they want to go to. I mean, unless it's choice. If it's choice, then it's choice. But if we're trying to keep some strong families within certain schools to create diversity, create economic balance, then I think we need to take that into very strong consideration.
Next recommendation is, should be pretty brief. Middle school recommendation aligns with the elementary recommendation that allows us to look at cohort patterns from elementary to middle. And so, yes, recommendation 1 for middle school. So further, a deeper look at that with the whole notion of what the board has mentioned already, a focus on the possibility of the impact of increased poverty if we do that in certain schools, which is a variable that we would take a look at as well, and what the possibilities for modifying or tweaking, if any. The next item centers on the middle school recommendations 2 and 3. The recommendation is that the board allow us to consider further discussion and implications for 2 and 3, which would be inclusive of Lafayette Winona, and the potential of repurposing Lafayette Winona, and looking at a timeline for that, if this is something that we're going to embrace, which would require the notion of rezoning in a way that the current students that attend Lafayette Winona would attend other schools, and it's an opportunity to do it from a phase-in standpoint, or there are some other measures that can be taken to do so. But again, timeline around which that process should begin. We feel that if we take a look at repurposing Lafayette Winona, it would give us a year to plan, so that when we're ready to roll out the modified zones, that we're doing it in an incremental fashion, so that we involve the community in that discussion. That's one thought, and at the same time build a state-of-the-art innovative opportunity for choice at the middle school level and make Lafayette Winona that opportunity, which would be the IB and STEM emphasis, and a choice emphasis at the middle school level that could attract students from across the jurisdiction. And so that is another example of an option that we'd like to do further discussion around, and we're open to any comments, or at this point, I think you had some discussion about that already, pretty extensive. Whether if there's additional discussion, emphasis here is really centers on what we're able to do in terms of not only taking advantage of underutilization at the middle school level, but taking advantage of that in a way that it opens the door for great choice at the middle school level for students from across the division, and doing it in a way that we build attractive opportunities for reference. The whole notion of strong academic families and building the whole socioeconomic diversity as well. Any thoughts or questions or comments on that one? As we move forward, I'm close to the end. Recommendation relating to Campostella. We recommend that you allow us to move forward with our current planning with Campostella K-8 STEM Swim. Of course, you should recall that the board approved the planning around Campostella, I believe at the capacity of 1,300. And we are in the middle of PPA discussions right at this moment. And we're hopeful that we may possibly have some other opportunities that could possibly fall between the 1,300 and the 1,100 number. And if it does, then it changes the opportunity for the options and flexibility around things that we can do. Now, we don't know that at this point. That is hopefully going to be something that we will know soon, and we will know what our constraints are around that. But again, the recommendation is to move forward with Campostella as K-8 STEM Swim. Dr. Simmons, I know that there was a PPEA meeting today, and I know that there are limitations on where we are and what we can and can't say. Is there something
I would like
we
to
can
share
update?
that we are very optimistic about the 300 seats so that we can get to where the board, get closer to what the board approved.
200 or
1,300 total.
Two. Okay.
It would enable for choice if, after we factor in the other students from a demographic study.
The
perhaps.
invisible students.
Yeah.
So that is the recommendation in reference to Campostella K-8 STEM Swim. The next recommendation centers on Lake Taylor High School as the CTE high school location. We recommend that continue, and we propose moving forward with the plan to acquire funding and moving forward with the notion to build a new comprehensive career technical education high school on the current Lake Taylor High School site. Of course, this plan was previously adopted and approved by the board. This will allow us to take a look at the implications for boundary redistribution or phase in of that and timing around that. And so our suggestion in that recommendation is allow us to move forward for 15 with the planning around the CTE high school, and to be inclusive of potential redistribution of existing high school boundaries and what that would mean for us. That would give us 14, 15 to begin to do that, and to look at the implications of 15, 16 for potential redistribution or phase in, and so that we're ready for the projection of when that building will be ready, if and when funded. And so that means that planning can continue so that we can build that whole process. Any questions and comments on that?
Why?
Only the very old know this, Dr. King, but almost 50 years ago was the last time secondary schools were redistricted in Norfolk. And it could be $1 billion, whatever it's 9 million, 80 million, could be $1 billion. We don't know where it's headed, but hopefully if there's a line item in this year's budget that moves us to the next step of consideration, and we can begin presenting to the city the plans for CTE. I really like your idea of practice walking, of piloting, or putting out an imaginary plan long before we actually try to implement it. I just think that works very well.
Might I suggest on that too, just very quickly, is that whatever the number of the high school is, that it should be noted that the cost is just a small part of it. An economic impact study of what, first of all, construction of a $75 million building can do on top of the $60 million you're going to throw into other buildings.
Right.
On top of that, the economic impact study of trained students in career pathways should be initiated. And you've got 2 fine universities that do that for school divisions across the country, right in the state. And I would suggest that an economic impact study be a good pathway for something like that. Just, has that been mentioned before somewhere? But you know, there's no such thing like stimulus like building schools. And I think that the turnaround on that, I think that can be beneficial in a discussion.
I just think this is a very exciting possibility, but for that reason, I'm going to make some statements that this is the first step Mr. Richter's given us. I don't think that Mr. Richter ought to leave. I think we ought to just say, see you soon, because we have to keep in touch with Mr. Richter as we move through some of this, and I just hope the board will consider how we can do that keeping in touch as we begin to move through this master planning and then rolling this out.
In the summer, preferably.
Okay, so, and I want to remind the board, the governor's team, and the public, so the administration, that, of course, this allows us to continue with the whole embedded notion of the transformation process that we outlined. It does not change the themes that we recommended, does not change the professional learning that we feel would be beneficial in terms of infusing rigor, taken for granted that with that comes the professional learning for building level leaders as well as central level leaders as well as classroom teachers that would center on aligning the taught curriculum with the assessed curriculum and also measuring outcomes in terms of centering on mastery from a formative standpoint. So getting better and better with that and moving from 99.8 or 9% highly qualified to hopefully highly effective at that level and working toward the 100% mark. So those schools that were outlined for the transformation initiative would then move forward in that same format as we mentioned months back, and it's also inclusive of these recommendations that we just mentioned. It's a part of that. The difference is that we initially talked about a potential proposal that would center on the conversion charter piece as an administration. We modified that in terms of going forward with a different strategy to achieve the same outcome for what we wanted for students. And with the notion of building the packages around these schools as proposals and innovative programs and themes and or magnet approaches along with choice, we feel that we will ultimately have access to additional dollars at the federal level as well as innovative grants that are out there for this purpose. So wanted to remind the governance team of that as well as our stakeholders as we continue to do the work moving forward. The last piece is that a part of that package is the whole notion of open campus. And, and that is a part of the transformation initiative. And you're well aware of what we feel that will accomplish for us, removing the overage for grade concept from middle school to get those students back on track. Also honing in on students that are behind on credits on our current high school campuses to the point where mathematically it's very difficult for them to get back on track. So customizing that approach for those students, along with attracting back students that have dropped out. And so that the intent here is to increase the on-time graduation rate and to reduce the dropout rate at the same time. So that is also a huge part of this whole package. So with this study and the recommendations that we are placing on the table, then I feel that we will have the strong potential of moving forward with a comprehensive package that we can phase in a way that we can make a difference for our students to begin to make our division the cornerstone of a proudly diverse community. as our stakeholders have said we should do in terms of our vision. And with that, I close.
Thank you. So let me offer this in terms of next steps. And I know that there are some comments. Mr. Jordan mentioned some things in the pit of his stomach. We want to allow an opportunity to clear that up. But after the comments, what I would ask for are motions on these recommendations separately, both elementary and middle school, and I would encourage very clear and concise wording relative to research, exploration, fact-finding, and community engagement, so that we're all very clear on what we are voting on and authorizing and supporting the superintendent and administration to do. Campostella nor the CTE school would need a vote because the current plans are not changing at all, so there would need to be no motion or vote on either one of those.
I'm confused.
Yeah.
I'm real confused. Help me with.
So we have recommendations.
What's Dr. King just mentioned?
Yes.
Yes.
Recommendations for recommendation 2 and 3
Yes.
for elementary schools. We have recommendation 1, 2, and 3 for the middle schools. For the high school, there's no change in what the board has already decided in the recommendation. Nor is there a change in what the recommendation is for Campostella, other than what we've already decided.
Do we recognize, well, first of all, the question is, do we vote, you want us to vote on it today? Or do we save that for?
We've got a lot more master planning. We've got a lot of elements. I have to tell you, I'm all in favor of everything that I heard.
Well, it says a board meeting.
I'm all in favor of everything Dr. King said, but
Understand.
it's an isolated vote, not considering a whole lot of other things. And I don't want to cause Dr. King to go down, and his colleagues to go down one road. We've got a whole lot of other pieces to consider at the same time.
Here's what I want us to avoid. I want us to be, first of all, very clear on next steps. And the other thing that I want to, the recommendations are clear here. And so the administration can't do anything else other than what they recommended to us tonight until we give them the green light to move forward with something. Now, whether we do that at the March 19th meeting, as we take actions in our business meeting, or in April, but we have the recommendations and they're very clear, and so.
I personally would like to see them in writing. There ain't here anything that I heard that I wouldn't support.
Right.
But I would like to see them, and what I don't want to do is to say, yep, go left, and then all of a sudden, when we consider all the other pieces of the pie that's going to go into a master plan, have to alter that. I don't want to send the administration down a false start. I personally would like to see them in writing.
Okay.
Can I
So,
offer something?
sure. Yes.
Oh, I just want to make sure you're finished. Okay.
No?
Okay. What I would suggest we do is we craft the motions as indicated, and as our new norm is that we vote on them during the business meeting.
Right.
So that's what I would recommend.
I'm simply trying to be clear on what our next steps need to be.
I agree.
And because a lot of work is going into this, the recommendations are very clear. And now whether we agree on what I'm recommending, that's fine. We can make another recommendation, but we need to be clear on next steps at the end of this conversation. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ren.
So this is where I was, this is in response to what you said. So, ends. You know, we have conversations about ends and means. So I'd like for us to talk about the ends that we agreed to. You know, even as we talked about, you know, previous initiatives and planning, you know, I would like to be in a position to say to the superintendent administration, they should always be in a position to go plan and work on that which they think is in the best interest of the district. So I'm not sure I understand the specific vote that we're talking about. in regards to the recommendations, and maybe that's a certain comfort level that I could understand why Dr. King would want. But I want to go back and have some conversations before we do that around ends. So when we first started down the path of we producing for TV now? Like, so what you say is stop or go? TV timeout? Oh, doesn't have to be on TV. When we first started down this path, we had some consensus around trying to reduce concentration of poverty at some of our high-poverty schools. That was an end. Dr. King worked on some means, and he described some ways that we may be able to get there over time. Now we got 300 pages last night. We've had one presentation. We've gotten some recommendations. Some of the recommendations are, my words, in violation of those original ends. So if we're going to change the ends, then I'd like to have a conversation around what are the new ends that we're going to put forward, whether it's poverty, choice, closing achievement gaps, whatever they are, that we have a conversation around that. So whatever it is that the administration goes off and works on, that there's that framework. So it just seems to me it's a lot that I'm trying to digest, and you know, if we have some time to do that and talk about as a governance leadership team really what we feel our ends are, I like to do that. The other thing, you know, we come back around and have some other discussions. I guess part of what's in the pit of my stomach is I just still personally haven't found the data where the separate but equal high poverty works. Okay, and if we go back to 2001 when we changed the middle school boundaries, there were some commitments that were made in terms of equity and funding and so forth. Those things got lost. So as a governance leadership team, as we talk about whatever path that we go down, and I think Dr. Stewart brought this up at the last meeting in terms of what one board does and another board can undo, that we have some real solid conversations around not only what this board is committing to, but if we are going to be working with our funding partners at City Hall, that we have some conversations with them as well, so we don't find ourselves making some commitments to some things now, and then, you know, budgets get tight and then priorities change because of funding. So I would just like to make sure that whatever we do, that the academics is going to drive it, and there's going to be some commitment to provide the supports that are needed to have success. And just for now, the other piece, as we consider the recommendations, I was just looking at the demographic profile of individuals that responded to the surveys. And the demographic profile of the individuals that responded to the survey are far different than the demographic profile of the city as a whole, or of the families that currently have students in Norfolk Public Schools. So it might be helpful, I think, for example, if we're going to look at combining or aligning Jaycox and Lindenwood, which to me violates the other principle. But in terms of schools that we're affiliated with, 6% of the folks that responded represented Jaycox. Where Lindenwood go? 5.3% represented Lindenwood. Some of these other schools that are going to be impacted, PBL 1.4%, Richard Bowling 2.9%. Now we can't necessarily control who responds, but I think it's an indicator that we should make a special effort on our end in terms of our courageous advocacy for all students to try to make sure that we are communicating with those families that are being particularly impacted, that they understand what we're talking about, and have some additional opportunity to understand the pros and cons of what's being discuss. And the last thing with that is the academic research piece of it. I mean, we were talking numbers and you mentioned some examples, but I just like to, it would make me feel a little better if I just could get a better sense of the research that indicates that these models, not necessarily the theme, because I'm with that, but some of these configurations are going to work at 90% poverty levels. Because I just feel that oftentimes if we're honest, those that have the opportunity to choose don't choose those schools. And so if there's some way in this moving forward that whatever it is that we design, that is something that we say we would put our children in, then I can be okay with it. But if it's something that we're saying that we wouldn't put our children in, but we are saying it's okay for other folks to put their children in, that makes me uncomfortable. So I don't know if part of the steering committee discussion or part of the surveys, if individuals who responded who have the ability to not have their quality of their school determined by their zip code, if they said they would opt into some of these schools, I would like to hear that. Otherwise, we may just be, you know, designing something that we hope will produce choice, but if we know it is not likely to, then let's not pretend and play around with it. That makes sense to you.
Can I ask a question of Mr. Jordan? Yeah. Mr. Jordan, are you thinking now of the pairings of the K2? Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, you mentioned the change in the secondary school boundaries. So 10 years ago, when we changed middle school, right, we predicted that it would not have an impact on academic achievement, enrollment in Norfolk public schools would go up, and diversity would go up. The opposite happened.
I got it.
Okay? So we said similar things back in the 80s, and the opposite happened. So I just think we need to have some real conversations around what we're proposing and whether or not there's likely to be the outcomes that we say.
Tracy, first of all, thank you for coming back for this report. I know we asked you to deliver this very quickly based on our last, so I appreciate your time and attention to putting more time into having more community forums. So thank you for that. This is super complex, and we have to consider this in alignment with budget, with transformation, with construction and other. And I don't know that a vote is necessary to enable the administration to go forth and research further, because I think we need to do that anyway, just so that we can be smarter about the budget discussion, the transformation discussion, construction discussion, the IT discussion, the 5-year budget planning. So I feel like coming out of today, what we need to do is ask the administration to further research, but what we need to do is put a timeline in place where we are going to proactively communicate among ourselves, within the administration, and to the community, what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, what are the deliverables, etc. And I think we need to have that conversation in conjunction with them doing the further research. I think what we need to do, again, is to be very proactive in our communication on this. And then we need to live up to doing what we say we're going to do in those communications, especially to the community. I mean, this is transformational on top of transformation. And I think it's all good, and I'm glad we're embarking on these initiatives. But we need very clear timelines of what we are looking to do. And I'm not saying when we're going to achieve recommendation 2 in what school year that will take place. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying that as a result of the report today, what is it we're going to do after today? Who is it with whom we're going to speak? Who is going to be the spokespeople, persons? How is the administration going to move forward on their research? When are we going to have further board discussion, and so on? And I don't necessarily think that we need a vote today for them to further their review of this.
And I agree with you in concept. Here's my concern. My concern is that if we don't, whether today or on the 19th, agree, not just in principle, but with regards to specific actions that are in the minutes, saying this is what the board formally agreed to do as next step, there's going to be confusion a month from now, What is it we said to do? What did we, so now who's doing, so and I'm one person, I'm sorry.
That's what she's asking us to do.
I understand that, but I'm saying if it's not a formal decision that clearly reflects this is the will of the board, then I think we set ourselves up for future confusion. Now, I'm not trying to force my will on the board. The best predictor of past behavior, of future behavior is past behavior. And I think if the minutes doesn't reflect very clearly at some point, doesn't have to be tonight, at some point, if this is what we are agreeing to as next steps, and this is what we're asking the administration to do, here's what we're agreeing to do. So whether it's a formal vote or not, I think we need to be very, very clear. It needs to be entered into the minutes, and so we can move forward. I don't want this to get cloudy, you know, and we miss a great opportunity to really follow up in a very organized and proactive manner on the steps in alignment with strategic plan, budgeting, and I agree with everything you just said. I just want to make sure we're really, really clear on what we do when we walk out of this room next. That's and not just so we're going to have more discussions.
Right. What will help me, I completely agree, because many times we've had elaborate discussions and it just kind of went off to the ozone. I would be very interested in seeing what Dr. King would like us to agree to. Sure. It could be that it would be quite easy once I see it in print.
Sure.
As I was listening to him, I didn't hear anything that I disagreed with. Right. But it would be helpful to me to see what he wants to make sure so that your mission, for this particular initiative, this particular vote,
and
I completely agree with it.
Listening to us right now.
Right.
And I think they need to be clear.
Right.
When we walk on the
what we're going to do, right.
I'm serious. I am very serious.
But there's,
you know, we need to be clear, and everybody that's listening and watching right now need to be clear. Because something's going to be said tomorrow about what we decided to do tonight, right, or what we don't feel to decide to do. Does that make sense?
I'll follow anybody else, because I have one more thing to say.
Okay. Okay, no other than that.
I think what we need by the close of the week is the recommendations that Dr. King and his administration have put forward, along with the comments that we have made as far as extra variables and whatnot. So I would say that by the end of the week, we need to have that. The superintendent's recommendations on top of what DeJong-Ritchter has recommended. Well, he said to consider his recommendations.
No,
what?
I don't think we need both of those.
Well, I'm saying they're one and the same basically at this point in time. We need Dr. King's recommendations in writing, clearly spelled out, along with the variables that we have brought back to him during our discussion by the close of the week. Friday.
I'm listening.
And then at that point in time, once we get those recommendations, then we can consider them in conjunction with the other details. Hopefully we'll have some updates with PPEA. This is where, you know, we're going to need to discuss how we want to move forward. But I think that we definitely need the recommendations in writing by the end of this week. And then we need to have some discussion as to when we're getting the next update on PPEA, because that's how we're going to plan in conjunction with this educational planning study.
Sure. I would offer a recommendation that I feel aligns with what you just described. However, it may not align with your timeline that reflects by the end of the week. But what I would like to do, and of course, we're certainly open to the team adding to the recommendation. I would like to list the recommendation clearly for the team, step by step, because we had a series of recommendations. I would like to list each, and then connect to the recommendation anticipated academic impact in terms of the outcomes. Of course, the means are going to be obvious, but in terms of the outcomes. And provide a suggested timeline for the board. Of course, it will be a suggested timeline. Any of this can be tweaked by the members of the board. And provide a proposed budget that we can anticipate over time. For example, if we start implementation 14-15, which is next school year, there's a price tag that could possibly be attached to it, and we'll list that. And if it's over a 5-year phase-in, we list each year and what we propose a projected cost. And so we describe each recommendation as I've suggested, if the board is not opposed to what we placed on the table, and then tie it to the academic achievement impact and timeline, budget. Now, what I would have to be clear on, however, would be, and I did make some notes, and I know that members of my team did as well, would be the variables that you would want us to consider merging with some of the recommendations that were already made. Is different than what I mentioned, if any, if that makes sense. Because I made a note of the one that I made a note around was where we were increasing the percentage of free reduced lunch in one school as a net effect of the recommendation. And so that would be one that we consider as we do the work I just described.
And then I had mentioned the parental involvement and feedback from doing the 2 separate elementary schools, bus stops and all that.
And see, my thinking is, once we do this, then, and we know where we are as a governance leadership team, then that opens the door to begin the conversations with the appropriate communities that would be potentially impacted by it. And so the next step, after we determine what we recommend and everybody's on the same page with it, will be to build out that process based on that timeline to say, because part of the timeline will reveal when we present it to you, when we propose or suggest that we go to the appropriate public that's impacted by it to secure feedback and input over what period of time, all of those things, which we'll get at what you just described. You know, one notion that has been pretty extensive in the discussion, and I agree that thus far, with the recommendations with the partnering schools in the configuration of K2 and 3-5, it doesn't change hyper-poverty or the percentage of students that are receiving free reduced lunch in those schools. What I feel that it has the potential of doing, if done correctly, and that's what we're in a discussion around, would be, for example, these schools are now K5. One principal in a hyper-poverty school is required to be the expert in the early piece as well as the 3-4-5 piece, all of the above at the same time, as far as professional learning and training, in addition to infusing the rigor and internalizing what we're about to add to that process. Well, if we move forward with the K2 notion and the 3-5 notion, then you have a principal that now focuses on the K2 piece and the needs of the early learning implications in preparing students to read, along with all the other things that we mentioned. And then a separate entity, school, principal, that focuses on the 3-4-5 piece, which we talk about the importance of the rigor after you learn to read, and now you're reading to learn. So it takes away some of those requirements in terms of having a laser-like focus on what instruction means in those 2 areas. Now, I'll be the first one to say that if that's not done at a high level, then it's not effective, any way you do it. So, but that is an example of not securing one of the indicators that we outlined, which is the socioeconomic piece, but it is an example of positioning us to better provide the services in a laser-like way so that we are ensuring that we're honing in on those things. And I believe that it will allow us to support, train, and provide the tools and resources to the building level leaders in those schools to be able to move that forward. And so those are some of the things that you, of course, see in the academic impact with a quantitative projection of what that would mean, an increase in percentage of students meeting and exceeding. For example, we didn't talk about accountability and the whole mechanism that's in place right now, because when you do that, if a 3-5 school doesn't make a benchmark, then the K-2 school doesn't make the benchmark either. So it doesn't position you to change the whole rigor around accountability, because that's not what we're after. What we're after centers on making students strong at the early level and then at the upper elementary level, so that when they move on, they're ready to do the things that are necessary.
So
I'll follow anybody, because I've talked a lot, but I have two important things for me, important to me.
go right ahead.
Number one, Dr. King, at our last meeting, and before our next meeting on the 12th, I asked you to include, if you can, for the board to consider a line item for CTE. If we were doing enough, and could we do more for expanding pre-K to more and leading to pre-K for all, and the starting principal salaries, because a lot of folks will be retiring in the few years, and I want us to be ready to get the very best, to replace the very best. Now, because Mr. Richter is here, I'm going to say this in front of him, he can't go away from us. He's got to be part of our future, and therefore I look to you to see, perhaps you already have a line item in there, that keeping in touch with Mr. Richter over time, perhaps a year, whatever, again, in the summer. But I think it's going to be critical that he be able to assist us. Huh? Say again? But I think it's going to be critical, so whatever way you could show us on the 12th that might be possible for the board to consider, if they still want to do that, I think is very, very important. As far as making a decision and giving you direction on the 19th, here's what I fear. I have a feeling when you send me what it is you'd like me to say to go ahead, I think I'm probably going to be able to agree to it right away. But I'm seeing big decisions coming after the city leaders tell us what the budget is, after we know how PPEA is going. And again, I've emailed you copying Superintendent Dr. Houston. I think the school board needs to go there. I'll volunteer to go to the first one, but I think we need to be seeing what's going on. We need to be advocating. We need to be knowing. We need to have the channel of communications open between the school board and the city on this. But there's so many other pieces. There's the salaries schedule. There's so many other pieces that I would hesitate to try and have to make this isolated decision on everything and then have to make another isolated decision. So I see our big master planning session is when a lot of this is. I'm predicting, from what I heard you say, that I'm going to say, yeah, let's go with that. But I don't want to make an isolated decision.
So here's what I hear, two things, and I simply, again, I want to be really, really clear. I'm like nobody else, at least the 8 of us, when we walk away from this table. If you were to ask either one of us separately, what y'all gonna do next? And we always say the same thing. Here's what's gonna happen next.
Good idea.
So I hear two things. I hear Mr. Jordan requesting additional discussions regarding the ends, looking at a way of communicating more with persons who will be greatly impacted but were not greatly represented in the surveys, and making additional effort to communicate with folks, and additional academic research on the proposed model. Okay. Sam is saying he will provide for us academic achievement impact information on these proposals, as well as proposed timeline and a proposed budget. So we need to decide when would we have the discussion that Mr. Jordan is recommending to continue to look at the items that he's placed before us. And my question would be around about time, at least, when this information that Sam is going to provide back to us, when do you anticipate getting that to us? So again, when we walk away from the table, we have an idea of when these things are going to take place, and it's just not somewhere in the near future. Does that make sense?
I got to respond. We've got to know what the city's going to give us for a budget this year to know how we're going to move that in the next 5 years. We've got to know, therefore, what we're going to move to the CIP to try and deal with Rex's report and Andrea's report on how we can deal with the great deferments and great losses because of state budget cuts and federal budget cuts on deferred maintenance and deferred technology needs. We've got to consider the salaries presentation. All of those things got to be considered, I think, together. Okay. But I think whatever I see in writing from Dr. King, I think I'm going to be able to say, yeah, let's go with that. But there could be a different year. Like what Dr. King might say we might do in 14-15, it could be that it would fit better in 15-16, or maybe 15-16 would fit better. And I can't say that right now. But once I see it, I might be able to say it.
Well, I do understand we can't say any of those things right now.
Yeah.
So
But I think walking away, what I can say is this is valuable information. I want to make sure that Mr. Richter is available to us, and that soon we can make a master planning decision that does all this. And if those 3 or 4 months that Dr. King can be moving to start getting ready for this, that we could do go-aheads that would help him with that. But,
so Sam, I think it would be helpful right now just to know when you think you would have this information for us.
Okay, well, let me do this. I want to for my team to hear what I am suggesting. So I'm going to repeat that, and then I'm going to ask for comments around timeline.
Right.
And at the table, I see Dr. Simmons and I see Dr. Savigny, and we have other staff that's with us. So what I am proposing is that we clearly outline the recommendations. We already have that for the most part. And that we add a column aligned with the recommendation that centers on the academic impact, the proposed academic impact, and quantify that, and in terms of linking it to what we feel it would mean in terms of increased percentage of students meeting and exceeding standards, incrementally, potentially by year, in terms of what we think a target would be for growth around these items. And then the next piece will be timeline for implementation for the recommendation, which means year 1 is X, it could be planning. Year 2 is implementation, or it could be year 2 is modification of zones and implementation, etc., depending on the recommendation. And then a proposed, pretty global, but a proposed budget based on whether we do a multiple year rollout, how much it would cost us, we anticipate, if anything, in terms of transportation or embedded costs, because much of this is already proposed in the professional learning items that we mentioned. So we'll outline that. So those are the things that I'm saying we will put together for the board and provide it for your review. And so, what say you?
I'm get some water. Okay.
If I could, while they're thinking, may I allow you more time to think on that one?
Thank you.
I think we also need a timeline where we say, when are we going to revisit this again as a board? And when are we going to have conversations that takes into account the budget discussion, the construction timeline, and everything else? Because the timeline you're describing, Sam, is I think a very good one, but that's the project timeline for years out of implementation if we were to pursue that recommendation. Sure. We need a project timeline of how we're going to address this incrementally, starting after this meeting today.
Yeah, and you will also decide which recommendations you endorse, and that's going to be important.
Sure, and so that needs to take place at another meeting where we discuss this as a board and take into account, again, all those other complex issues that fold up into this. So I think we need a timeline that addresses that as well, that folds into when we're meeting and when the budget discussions happen and when the 5-year budget planning takes place, which goes back to Warren's point of the master planning. Did I give you enough time to think?
She left.
Okay. Oh, she left? She was
On the section for academic impact, if we can also include, and I'm sure that you were thinking about this when you mentioned it, any school that's going to be impacted by choice and transformation, how those particular concepts are going to be transforming that school's academic outlook.
That's what I meant by the E.
Yep. Okay.
Any feedback from the team?
Clarifying before he puts his team on the spot. Initially, I thought you said you were going to use 2014 as a planning year, right?
Right. I offered that as a potential example of what a timeline could look like.
Right. So I guess I would just ask, is there anything you're asking us to decide now that you're trying to implement in September? Because maybe that's what just needs to bubble up. Because I'm trying to give you time to do whatever it is that you feel you need to do in terms of planning, bring back to us, and then we can have the discussion. But I'm not real clear on what we really need to vote on now.
I can make it real simple.
Go ahead.
Rather than, Sam is already saying what information he needs to pull together for us, rather than putting the administration on the spot right now, give Sam the opportunity to meet with the team and discuss what's a reasonable time frame for this information, and then he can notify us as to when the next quote-unquote round of information relative to decision making in Lancaster County will be available. Is that fair?
Well, and based on my engagement with the team, then it could impact, Mr. Jordan, the answer to your question, because when we come back to you, it could reflect, here's some things we feel should happen immediately.
And then we need to know that right away.
I was gonna say,
And we would need to know
next
that.
week is not too soon.
Okay.
That's a budget.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
And there could be budget savings too, you know,
Yeah.
Okay.
not always budget expenses.
Yeah, I would just recommend that we probably move it as expediently as we can as relates to some of the recommendations, because they do have an impact on the PPEA. And it's early enough right now to use that input to affect change as we begin our plans for school construction.
Right.
The sooner we get that information, the sooner we'll be able to act accordingly. Okay?
Because I see that connection,
Sure.
that's why I'm asking for a school board member to be there, and
Right.
I've emailed Dr. Houston, CC'd Dr. King, and I volunteer to go to the first meeting whenever you tell me it is.
Except when you're in Florida.
Or maybe I am.
Okay. So, Tracy, thank you. You've been accommodating, and especially the two additional meetings we requested most recently. We appreciate your company and your hard work and flexibility in this effort. It has already been strongly recommended that we keep you on retainer.
I'll write the check.
I'll be happy. Okay.
That was on camera.
Let's negotiate on the price.
Yes, that's the business meeting, it's on the 19th. Next week, they have the budget meeting on the 12th. Okay, so I would ask you, are there any final comments or thoughts before we close out this discussion?
Well,
Yes.
I wanted to kind of tighten this up just a bit.
Yeah, if we
Okay.
could, let's get timing down here a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Okay.
So, the 19th could potentially be the time that you have discussion around what we provide you. And so what we need to determine as a team would be when we get it to you for your review prior to the 19th. And so, do we feel like we have some answers on that now, potential answers on? 19th will be the time we have public discussion around the documents.
Well,
What are your
no,
thoughts?
no. Now, we need to do some agenda planning because we already have some plans for the 12th and the 19th of both budget discussions, because we got to wrap this budget up by the 26th. And so,
So the budget discussion next week is 12 to 4. So if we add 30 minutes to that and discuss this, potentially?
After the budget.
After the budget.
After, make sure we do the budget
So
first.
4 to 4:30, we discuss what Dr. King,
Supposed
the
to go to
administration.
Williamsburg. That's why it was moved up. That's why it's moved up.
Is
yes,
everyone
this is
going?
12. And let y'all,
But this is more important.
I would agree.
Cuts us by a week.
okay, so, I mean, can we do budget 12 to 3:30, and then include this
Let's do
discussion?
that.
What day are we talking?
Next
We're
Wednesday.
talking next Wednesday, the 12th.
What if you can
Okay,
repeat
we're good.
that?
I'm good.
Rather than 12
I'm
to
good.
4 with the budget, 12 to 3 or 3:30, and then this,
You just took a week away from us.
I I do understand that. Sorry. Okay, so, okay. So
Going
let's,
all
okay,
nighter.
all right, so let's go to the 19th. Okay, so let's go to the 19th,
Yeah, let's go
open
to
and
the 19th.
formal.
That was
Same,
smart. You
same
caught
principle
that.
applies.
You caught that.
We could, build in time, we had the budget discussion for the entire informal session, which would have been 3 to 5:30. And so, if we do our work well next Wednesday, then we should be able to allow 30 to 45 minutes of this open and formal session to continue planning.
And 19th, we're beginning at 12 at this time, right? So
It says
you're
1
saying-
o'clock.
We begin at
Oh,
1.
1 o'clock.
We begin at
1
1
o'clock?
on the
With the,
19th.
So maybe if we showed up, you could have some greens there and we can go forward.
We'll have greens for
We
you.
can have our conversation at noon.
Yes. Okay, so we can make that modification to the open and formal session? I would suggest 45 minutes, not 30 minutes.
All right, so can we just be clear again, Dr. King, what will you share with us next week?
Nothing next
Nothing.
week. Nothing on the 12th. We're going to 19th.
So we're not gonna do anything next week?
Right.
On this topic?
Because we're not giving them enough time.
Okay, so then it's just on the 19th, and then at that point, you'll provide. Okay.
What, she's saying, what are we going to get on the 19th?
Oh, what are you gonna get on the 19th?
Let's just be very clear again. On the
Okay.
19th, for 30 minutes.
A description of the recommendation. With each recommendation, you will have a description of the academic impact, proposed academic impact, quantified in terms of targets, in terms of what we feel the change in student achievement would mean for literacy or numeracy, whether it's an X% increase in percent readings or exceeding, that kind of thing. So quantitative measures. Of course, the team reserves the right to modify that, but it will be quantified. But that's what I anticipate. Also a timeline for implementation for each of the recommendations. That could be inclusive of multiple years, and what will happen year 1, year 2. If it is inclusive of multiple years, it will be a description of what should happen year 1, year 2, etc. Along with anticipated budgetary impact, if any, by year throughout those. So with each one of those recommendations, of course, all of these things will be linked to the strategic plan, strategy, action plan, and action steps.
Can I add to that, though, that we also need to put a timeline in terms of after the 19th, when do we talk about this again? And when do we talk about the deliverable? And when do we talk about the deliverable again? So can you recommend a timeline for the project itself, not in terms of implementation of the recommendations?
All right, so if I'm understanding you, I think this answers your question. What I hope we will do on the 19th will be the board will make a decision around which of these recommendations that they will endorse based on the information provided. Once that happens, it allows us to hone in on the timelines that we've provided, because the timelines will say things that consist of, for example, engagement with the appropriate communities to receive input and feedback, etc. Each step that would be included in that item.
Okay.
So, thus, your approval of a possible recommendation would also tell you what happens next.
Okay.
And you have the open door to suggest that we need to be have an increased sense of urgency, or that we should modify the timeline.
Okay.
And so it should be pretty clear around all of those steps that should happen next with the communities, the community engagement, all of those things, all those items that you all have raised questions about.
Okay.
Okay, we have to stop now for our communications folks, and then we'll, so we can take a 10-minute break. Is 10 minutes good, Jim? Yes?
Cool.
Okay, 10
I gotta
minutes,
go somewhere.
and we'll tie this up, and then do the seal piece for the high school diploma. And I don't think it's, we'll see if we can do that.